The gun trembled in Clara's hand as she faced the man who'd just offered her the strangest proposition of her life: marry him by sunset, or leave forever. Jonah McAllister stood in the doorway of his ranch house, his weathered face unreadable as dust swirled between them in the dying light. "You have exactly 1 hour to decide," he said, his voice rough as desert sand. "Welcome to a story where desperation meets destiny in the heart of 1885 Arizona. Follow Clara's journey to the very end, and don't forget to comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this tale has traveled." The stagecoach wheels had barely stopped turning when Clara Hastings stepped down onto the dusty main street of Copper Creek, Arizona territory. The year was 1885, and the afternoon sun blazed mercilessly overhead, turning the desert landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat and desperation. Her traveling dress, once a respectable navy blue, now bore the dust of 3 days' journey from Kansas City. In her worn leather purse, she carried exactly 47 cents, all that remained of her life savings, after purchasing the one-way ticket that had brought her to this remote frontier town. Clara pressed a gloved hand to her forehead, feeling the perspiration that had already begun to gather despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore. The advertisement she'd carefully torn from the Kansas City newspaper 3 weeks ago rustled in her pocket as she walked. Housekeeper wanted, it had read in bold print, Ironwood Ranch, Copper Creek, Arizona territory. Room board and fair wages. Inquire with J. McAllister. The town was smaller than she'd imagined, a single main street lined with wooden buildings that looked as if they'd been hastily constructed and might blow away with the next strong wind. The general store stood next to a saloon from which the tinny sound of piano music drifted despite the early hour. Across the street, a small church with a crooked steeple seemed to lean away from the constant desert wind. "Excuse me," Clara called to an elderly man sitting on a bench outside the general store, whittling a piece of wood with slow, deliberate strokes. "Could you direct me to the Ironwood Ranch?" The old man looked up, his eyes narrowing as they took in her city clothes and pale complexion. "Ironwood Ranch. That's McAllister's place." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "About 5 miles north, follow the creek until you see the Iron Gate. But if you're thinking of working there, miss, you might want to reconsider." "Why is that?" Clara asked, though she couldn't afford to be particular about employment. The old man resumed his whittling. "Jonah McAllister ain't exactly known for his hospitality. Lost 3 housekeepers in the past 6 months. They say he's got a temper that could scare the scales off a rattlesnake." Clara's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to smile. "Thank you for the directions." She had no choice. The 47 cents in her purse wouldn't buy her a return ticket, and she'd burned every bridge back in Kansas City when she'd refused to marry Harold Pemberton, a man 30 years her senior who smelled of cigars and greed. Her aunt, who'd raised her after her parents died of fever, had been furious. "You ungrateful girl," she'd spat. "Harold Pemberton is offering you security. What more could an orphan with no prospects expect?" But Clara had expected more. She'd expected love, or at least respect. She'd expected a life that was her own choosing, not one arranged for someone else's convenience. So she'd taken the small inheritance her parents had left, just enough for a ticket west, and answered an advertisement for honest work. The walk to Ironwood Ranch took nearly 2 hours in the afternoon heat. Her boots made for city sidewalks protested against the rocky trail. By the time she spotted the Iron Gate, the old man had mentioned her feet were blistered and her throat parched. The gate stood open. Its metalwork twisted into the shape of a tree, an ironwood tree, she supposed, though she'd never seen one before. The ranch house came into view as she crested a small hill, and Clara stopped to catch her breath. It was larger than she'd expected, built of adobe and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. But there was something austere about it, something lonely. No flowers grew in the yard, no curtains softened the windows. It looked like a house that had forgotten what it meant to be a home. Clara smoothed her dusty skirts, adjusted her hat, and walked up to the front door. She knocked 3 times, the sound echoing in the late afternoon stillness. The door opened so suddenly that Clara took an involuntary step backward. The man who filled the doorway was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his white cotton shirt. His face was sun-weathered and angular, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray as a storm cloud and just as turbulent. "Mr. McAllister," Clara's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Who's asking?" His voice was deep and rough, like gravel being ground underfoot. "My name is Clara Hastings. I've come about the housekeeper position, your advertisement in the Kansas City paper." "That advertisement was placed 3 months ago," he interrupted. "Position's been filled." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Filled? But I've come all this way." "Not my problem." He started to close the door. "Wait." Clara pressed her hand against the door, surprising herself with her boldness. "Please, Mr. McAllister, I've spent everything I have to get here. I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, mend, and I've kept books for my aunt's boarding house. Just give me a chance to prove myself." Jonah McAllister studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes moving from her dust-covered boots to her determined face. "You came all the way from Kansas City for a housekeeper job." "Yes." "No family, no husband waiting back home." "No." "How old are you?" 23. He was silent for so long that Clara began to think he'd dismissed her standing there. Then he spoke, and his words changed everything. "I'll offer you a job, Miss Hastings, but there's a condition." "Anything," Clara said quickly, relief flooding through her. "I'll work harder than any housekeeper you've ever—" "You'll marry me." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Clara was certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me right. I need a wife, not just a housekeeper. Marry me by sunset today, and you'll have a job, a home, and the protection of my name. Refuse, and you can walk back to town and figure out your own way home." Clara stared at him, searching his face for any sign that this was some cruel joke. But Jonah McAllister's expression was deadly serious. "You can't be serious. You don't even know me." "I know enough. You're desperate, you have no other options, and you need what I'm offering. I need a wife to secure a land claim. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." "This is insane," Clara breathed. "People don't just marry strangers." "People do whatever they need to survive out here, Miss Hastings." He pulled out a pocket watch and checked the time. "Sunset's in an hour. The justice of the peace lives half a mile down the road. We can be there and back before dark, or you can start walking back to town. Your choice." Clara's mind raced. This was madness. She'd left Kansas City to escape one unwanted marriage proposal only to receive another from a complete stranger. But Harold Pemberton had wanted a young wife to parade around society. This man, this rough, intimidating rancher, seemed to want something else entirely. A business arrangement, he'd called it. "If I agree," she said slowly, "what exactly would you expect from me?" "You'd keep house cook meals, help with the ranch accounts. In exchange, you'd have room board and a share of the ranch profits. As for other expectations—" His jaw tightened. "I'm not that kind of man. You'd have your own room. I need a wife in name only for legal purposes. And if I wanted to leave later, then we'd arrange a quiet divorce and I'd pay for your passage anywhere you wanted to go. But not for at least a year. I need the marriage to stand up to legal scrutiny for at least that long." Clara looked back down the dusty road she'd traveled then at the man offering her this devil's bargain. She thought of the 47 cents in her purse, the blisters on her feet, the bridges burned in Kansas City. She thought of her parents who died when she was 12, leaving her with nothing but memories and a stubborn streak that had gotten her into trouble more times than she could count. "Why," she asked, "why do you need a wife so badly that you'd marry a complete stranger?" For the first time, something flickered in Jonah McAllister's storm-gray eyes, a vulnerability quickly hidden. "That's my business. Yes or no, Miss Hastings, time's wasting." Clara took a deep breath. Every rational part of her screamed that this was foolish, dangerous even. But what choice did she have? She could marry this stranger and have a chance at survival, or she could walk away and face certain destitution. "I'll need to see the justice of the peace myself," she said, "to make sure this is legal and that I'm protected under the law." "Fair enough. And I want it in writing that I'll have my own room and that you won't. That our arrangement is strictly business." "Agreed." Clara's heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Then, yes, I'll marry you." Jonah nodded once, as if she'd just agreed to a cattle sale rather than a marriage. Get your things. We leave in 5 minutes. These are my things, Clara said, gesturing to the small carpetbag she'd set down by the door. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or pity, but it was gone before she could be sure. Wait here. He disappeared into the house and returned moments later wearing a black jacket and carrying a piece of paper. Marriage contract, he said, handing it to her. I drew it up weeks ago, hoping… Well, it doesn't matter. Read it over while we walk. They set off down a narrow path that led away from the ranch house. Clara read as she walked, struggling to focus on the legal language while her mind reeled from what she was about to do. The contract was straightforward enough. She would serve as wife and housekeeper for a minimum of 1 year, would receive room board and 10% of ranch profits, and would be granted a divorce with a settlement of $500 if she chose to leave after the year was complete. You had this ready, she observed. You've been planning this. I've had 3 housekeepers quit in 6 months, Jonah said without looking at her. Figured the next one might stay if she had more incentive. And the real reason you need a wife. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then the Homestead Act requires a family to claim certain parcels of land. There's a section north of here, the North Pasture it's called, that's crucial to my ranch's survival. Without it, I don't have enough water rights to maintain my herd through the dry season. The claim has to be filed by a married couple, and it has to be filed by tomorrow. Tomorrow. That's why the sunset deadline. Judge Thompson leaves for Tucson in the morning, won't be back for 3 months. By then, it'll be too late. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Clara asked, what happened to the other housekeepers? The ones who quit? They found the ranch too isolated, too quiet. Or too intimidating, Clara suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. Jonah glanced at her and she thought she saw the hint of a smile. Maybe that too. The justice of the peace lived in a small adobe house with a vegetable garden that seemed to thrive despite the desert heat. Judge Thompson himself was a round, cheerful man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose and a wife who clucked sympathetically when she saw Clara's travel-worn state. My dear, you look exhausted, Mrs. Thompson said. Are you certain you want to do this today? Perhaps you'd like to rest first. Have a proper meal. Clara looked at Jonah, who stood stiffly by the door, his expression unreadable. The sun was already low on the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. No, she said. Thank you, but we should proceed. Judge Thompson reviewed the marriage contract, his eyebrows rising slightly. This is a bit unusual, Mr. McAllister. It's legal, isn't it? Jonah's tone brooked no argument. Oh, perfectly legal, just unusual. The judge looked at Clara over his spectacles. Miss Hastings, you're entering this agreement of your own free will. Clara thought of all the choices that had led her to this moment, refusing Harold Pemberton leaving Kansas City, spending her last dollar on a stagecoach ticket to a town she'd never heard of. Each choice had narrowed her options until she stood here about to marry a stranger as the sun set over the Arizona desert. Yes, she said firmly, of my own free will. The ceremony was brief, almost businesslike. They stood before the judge in his small parlor, Mrs. Thompson serving as witness. Jonah had produced a simple gold band from his pocket. It was my mother's, he'd said quietly and slipped it onto Clara's finger as he repeated the vows. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Jonah leaned down and brushed the briefest of kisses across her cheek, a formality that left her skin tingling. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. McAllister, Judge Thompson said, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish. May you find happiness in your union. Mrs. Thompson insisted on giving them a basket of vegetables from her garden and a loaf of fresh bread. A wedding gift, she said, pressing it into Clara's hands. And my dear, if you ever need a friend, you know where to find me. The walk back to the ranch was conducted in complete silence. The sun had set and the desert came alive with new sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. Clara carried the basket while Jonah walked slightly ahead, his long strides forcing her to hurry to keep up. When they reached the ranch house, Jonah lit a kerosene lamp and led her inside. The interior was as austere as the exterior had suggested. Functional furniture, bare walls, everything clean but devoid of personality. He showed her to a room at the end of a hallway, setting the lamp on a simple wooden dresser. "This is your room," he said. "There's water in the pitcher for washing, and the outhouse is behind the kitchen. Breakfast is at sunrise. We'll discuss your duties then." He turned to leave, but Clara called after him. "Mr. McAllister, Jonah, wait." He paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. "Why did you really need to marry me? The truth this time." His shoulders tensed. "I told you. The land claim. There's more to it than that. I may be desperate, but I'm not stupid. You could have found a wife anywhere given yourself more time. Why the urgency? Why a stranger?" Jonah was quiet for so long that Clara thought he'd left. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because a stranger won't ask questions about the past. A stranger won't have expectations beyond our contract. And a stranger," he paused, "a stranger can't be disappointed when she learns what kind of man she's married." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. She heard a door close somewhere in the house, and then silence. Clara sat on the edge of the narrow bed, still wearing her dusty traveling dress, and tried to process what had just happened. This morning, she'd been Clara Hastings, unemployed and nearly penniless. Tonight, she was Clara McAllister, wife to a man she'd known for less than 2 hours, mistress of a ranch she'd barely seen. She removed her mother's wedding ring from her right hand and looked at it alongside Jonah's mother's ring, now on her left. 2 women's lives intersecting in the most unlikely way. What would her mother think of what she'd done? Would she understand the desperation that had driven Clara to this choice? A coyote howled again, closer this time, and Clara shivered despite the warmth of the evening. She rose and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape bathed in moonlight. It was beautiful in an alien way, all silver shadows and sharp edges. So different from the green fields of Kansas she'd known as a child before her parents died, and her world shrank to the confines of her aunt's boarding house. She thought about Jonah's words. A stranger can't be disappointed when she learns what kind of man she's married. What secrets was he hiding? What had driven him to this desperate measure? Clara began to undress her fingers, fumbling with the buttons of her travel-worn dress. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed the dust from her face and hands. The cool water was a relief against her sun-warmed skin. She found a nightgown in her carpetbag, one of the few decent pieces of clothing she owned, and changed into it. As she lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, she could hear movement elsewhere in the house. Footsteps pacing a door opening and closing, the scrape of a chair against the floor. Her husband. The word felt foreign even in her thoughts, was restless. She wondered what tomorrow would bring. She'd traded her freedom for security, her independence for survival. But had she also traded one prison for another, Harold Pemberton would have locked her in a gilded cage of society expectations. What kind of cage had Jonah McAllister prepared for her? The pacing stopped and the house fell silent. Clara closed her eyes and tried to quiet her racing thoughts. She'd made her choice. For better or worse, she was Mrs. Jonah McAllister now. Tomorrow she would learn what that truly meant. Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with dreams of storm-gray eyes and desert winds that whispered secrets she couldn't quite hear. Clara woke before dawn, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, the desperate journey, the shocking proposal, the hasty marriage to a stranger. She sat up, her body aching from the uncomfortable stagecoach ride and the long walk to the ranch. The house was quiet, but she could smell coffee brewing. Clara dressed quickly in her simplest dress, a brown calico that had seen better days, but was suitable for housework, and pinned her dark hair into a practical bun. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser. Her face was thinner than it had been 6 months ago when she'd had regular meals at her aunt's boarding house. Her green eyes, which Harold Pemberton had once called bewitching, now held a wariness that hadn't been there before. She made her way to the kitchen, following the smell of coffee. Jonah was already there, standing by the stove, his back to her. He'd changed into work clothes, denim trousers, and a faded blue shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. His dark hair was damp, suggesting he'd already washed. "Good morning," Clara said softly. He turned, seeming surprised to see her. "You're up early." "I'm used to it. I helped run my aunt's boarding house. Early rising was a necessity." He nodded and poured her a cup of coffee, without asking if she wanted one. "There's bacon and biscuits from yesterday. I'm not much of a cook." "I can make breakfast," Clara offered, "if you show me where everything is." For the next few minutes, Jonah opened cupboards and drawers, showing her the supplies and cooking implements. The kitchen was well stocked but disorganized, as if someone had been trying to maintain it but didn't quite know how. Clara mentally cataloged everything, already planning how she would rearrange things for better efficiency. "I usually eat at sunrise, noon, and sunset," Jonah said. "The hands eat in the bunkhouse. They have their own cook. You're only responsible for the main house." "How many hands do you have?" "6 currently, more during roundup." He paused, then added, "They don't need to know the details of our arrangement. As far as they're concerned, you're my wife in every way." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks but nodded. "Of course. I'll be heading to town after breakfast to file the land claim. You can start on whatever needs doing in the house. I imagine you'll find plenty." As Clara prepared a simple breakfast of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits, she was aware of Jonah watching her, not in an uncomfortable way, but as if he was trying to figure her out to understand why she'd agreed to his proposition. They ate in silence at the large wooden table that dominated the dining room. The sunrise painted the desert landscape outside the windows in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was beautiful, Clara had to admit, even if it was foreign to her. "This is good," Jonah said suddenly, gesturing to his plate. "Better than anything I've made in months." "Thank you." Clara hesitated, then asked, "The north pasture you mentioned, why is it so important?" Jonah's expression darkened. "It has the only reliable water source for miles during the dry months. Without it, I'd have to reduce my herd by half, maybe more. Wouldn't be able to compete with the bigger ranches. And you couldn't claim it without a wife. The specific parcel I need is designated for family homesteads only. Some bureaucratic nonsense from Washington, but the law is the law." He stood abruptly. "I should go. Town's a long ride." After he left, Clara stood in the middle of the kitchen, suddenly overwhelmed by the silence and the magnitude of what she'd taken on. She was alone in a strange house, in a strange land, married to a strange man. But she'd been alone before after her parents died, and she'd survived. She would survive this too. She started by exploring the house properly. It was larger than it appeared from outside, with 6 rooms plus the kitchen and a small study filled with ledgers and papers. The furniture was good quality, but covered in a fine layer of dust. The windows needed washing, the floors needed scrubbing, and the whole place needed what her aunt would have called a woman's touch. Clara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started in the kitchen, reorganizing the cupboards and scrubbing every surface until it gleamed. She found lye soap and cleaning supplies in a pantry and attacked the rest of the house with determined efficiency. As she worked, she discovered small clues about the man she'd married. A photograph on the mantel showed a younger Jonah with an older couple who must have been his parents. His father had the same strong jaw, his mother the same gray eyes. A Bible on a shelf in the study had an inscription, "To our beloved son Jonah, on his 18th birthday, may you always walk in righteousness, love mother and father." In what must have been his bedroom, she didn't enter. Just glanced through the open door. Everything was militarily neat. No personal items visible, no signs of the man who lived there beyond the functional furniture and a rifle mounted on the wall. By noon, Clara had cleaned the main living areas and started on the laundry she'd found piled in a basket. As she hung sheets on the line behind the house, she noticed a rider approaching from the direction of the barn. Not Jonah. This man was shorter, older, with graying hair and a weathered face. "You must be the new Mrs. McAllister," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm Bill Watson, the foreman. Pleased to meet you, ma'am." "Hello, Mr. Watson," Claire replied, suddenly conscious of her work-worn dress and the wisps of hair that had escaped her bun. "Just Bill is fine, ma'am. The boys and I wanted to welcome you proper-like. We're mighty glad Jonah finally found himself a wife. He's been alone too long." "Thank you, Bill. That's very kind." Bill shifted in his saddle, seeming to want to say more. "Ma'am, I've known Jonah since he was a boy. His father and I rode together back in the day. He's a good man, even if he don't always show it. Just give him time to warm up to having someone around again." Before Clara could ask what he meant, Bill touched his hat again and rode back toward the barn. His words echoed in her mind as she continued with the laundry. Alone too long. Give him time to warm up. What had happened to make Jonah so isolated? She was preparing dinner when she heard horses approaching. Through the kitchen window, she saw Jonah dismounting, and with him was another man, tall, well-dressed, with silver hair, and a bearing that suggested wealth and power. They entered through the front door, and Clara could hear their voices in the parlor, though not their words. The stranger's tone was smooth-cultured, but there was something in it that made her uneasy. Jonah's responses were short-clipped. After about 15 minutes, she heard footsteps approaching the kitchen. Jonah appeared in the doorway, his face tight with controlled anger. Behind him stood the stranger, whose pale blue eyes fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her want to step back. "Clara, this is Victor Grayson," Jonah said, his tone formal. "He owns the Double G Ranch to the south. Grayson, my wife Clara." "Mrs. McAllister," Grayson said, removing his hat with a flourish. What a delightful surprise. I hadn't heard that Jonah had taken a wife. When did this happy event occur? "Yesterday," Jonah said before Clara could answer. Grayson's eyebrows rose. "Yesterday? How impulsive. And where did you meet this lovely lady, Jonah? Surely not in Copper Creek. I would have noticed such a beauty." "Kansas City," Clara said, finding her voice. "I answered an advertisement for a housekeeper position." "And got a husband instead, Ma," Grayson said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How romantic, like something out of a dime novel." "Did you come here for a reason, Grayson?" Jonah's voice held a warning. "Simply to congratulate you on your marriage, of course. And to remind you that my offer still stands. The Double G could use that north pasture you're so fond of. I'd pay handsomely for it." "It's not for sale. It never will be." "Never is a long time, McAllister. A man's circumstances can change. A new wife, perhaps children someday. Expenses add up. My offer is generous." "Get out." Jonah's voice was quiet but dangerous. Grayson replaced his hat, his pale eyes moving from Jonah to Clara. "Mrs. McAllister, it was a pleasure. I hope we'll see more of each other. The Double G would be honored to host you for dinner sometime. You must be starved for civilized company out here." After he left, Jonah stood rigid in the kitchen, his fists clenched at his sides. "Who is he really?" Clara asked. "Trouble," Jonah said shortly. "Stay away from him. He wants the north pasture. He wants everything. The man's built an empire by taking what others have built." Jonah ran a hand through his hair. "I filed the claim today. It's official. The north pasture is part of Ironwood Ranch now." "Then why do I feel like he's not going to accept that?" Jonah looked at her, something like approval in his eyes. "Because you're smart. Grayson doesn't accept losing, ever." That night, after another silent dinner, Clara retired to her room but couldn't sleep. She could hear Jonah moving around the house, restless as he'd been the night before. Finally, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and ventured out to the porch. The desert night was cool, the sky brilliant with stars. She'd never seen so many stars in Kansas City, where gas lamps and smoke obscured the heavens. Out here, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. Couldn't sleep. She jumped. Jonah stood in the doorway behind her, a cup in his hand. "The stars," she said. "I've never seen anything like them." He moved to stand beside her at the porch rail, careful to maintain distance between them. City girl through and through. "Is it that obvious?" "Your hands," he said. "Soft, not used to ranch work." Clara looked at her hands already reddened from the day's cleaning. "They'll toughen up." "Why did you really come out here?" Jonah asked suddenly. "A woman like you, educated, refined, you could have found work in Kansas City. Why answer an advertisement for a position in the middle of nowhere?" Clara considered lying, but something about the darkness and the vast sky made her want to be honest. "I was running away." "From what?" "An unwanted marriage proposal. A man my aunt wanted me to marry. He was rich, respectable, and made my skin crawl." Jonah was quiet for a moment. "So you ran from one marriage straight into another. This is different." "How?" Clara thought about it. "You were honest about what you wanted. No pretense, no false promises of love or happiness. Just a straightforward arrangement. And that's better. It's cleaner, she said. I know where I stand with you. Jonah turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the starlight. Do you... Before she could answer, he went back inside, leaving her alone with the stars and the growing certainty that she understood Jonah McAllister far less than she'd thought. The next few days fell into a routine. Clara rose early to prepare breakfast. Jonah ate in near silence, then disappeared to work the ranch. She spent her days bringing order to the house, learning the rhythms of ranch life, and trying to understand the man she'd married. The ranch hands were polite, but distant, clearly unsure what to make of the boss's sudden marriage. Only Bill Watson made an effort to be friendly, often stopping by the kitchen door to share news from the range or stories about the early days of the ranch. Jonah's father started this place back in '65, Bill told her one afternoon as she kneaded bread dough. Just after the war. He had big dreams, old Sam McAllister, wanted to build something that would last, something to pass on to his son. What happened to him? Bill's face darkened. Died 5 years ago. He and Jonah's mother, both fever took them within days of each other. Jonah was barely 25, suddenly running the whole place alone. That explained some of the sadness she sensed in the house, the feeling that it was waiting for something or someone who would never return. On her 4th day at the ranch, Clara decided to tackle the study. It was a disaster of papers, ledgers, and correspondence piled haphazardly on every surface. As she sorted through the chaos, she began to understand the ranch's finances. Jonah was doing well enough, but there were inefficiencies, missed opportunities. Her experience with her aunt's boarding house books had taught her to spot such things. She was deep in a ledger when Jonah appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp. "Organizing," Clara said, not looking up. "Your bookkeeping system is creative. Those are private." "I'm your wife," she reminded him. "Our contract says I help with the accounts." He moved into the room, looming over the desk. "The contract says you keep house and cook. The books are my responsibility." Clara finally looked up, meeting his storm-gray eyes steadily. "You're losing money." "What what's here, Iaiui?" She pointed to an entry. "You're paying too much for feed. The supplier in Tucson charges 30% less. And here you're not accounting for seasonal variations in cattle prices. If you held off selling for just 2 weeks last fall, you would have made an additional $800. Jonah stared at the ledger, then at her. "How do you know all this?" "I told you I kept books for my aunt's boarding house. I'm good with numbers." She hesitated, then added, "I could help you if you'd let me." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Show me what else you've found." They spent the next 2 hours going through the books together. Clara pointed out inefficiencies, suggested improvements, and demonstrated a grasp of finance that clearly surprised him. For the first time since their marriage, they worked as partners rather than strangers sharing a house. "You could have been a bookkeeper in any city," Jonah said finally. "Why waste your talents on housework?" "Because respectable women don't work in offices," Clara said with a bitter smile. "We marry well, or become governesses or housekeepers. Those are the options. Or we marry strangers and help them save their ranches," Jonah said, and for the first time she saw him truly smile. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. That night at dinner, the silence was companionable rather than awkward. They discussed ranch business, crop prices, and the upcoming cattle drive. It was an intimate conversation, but it was progress. The fragile peace was shattered the next morning when Clara went to collect eggs from the henhouse and found all the chickens dead. Their necks had been wrung and painted on the henhouse wall. In what looked like blood was a single word, "Leave." Clara's scream brought Jonah running from the barn, his rifle in hand. He found her standing frozen before the henhouse, her face pale as desert sand. When he saw the carnage, his expression hardened into something dangerous. "Get inside the house," he ordered, his voice low and controlled. "But now, Clara." She fled to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to process what she'd seen. Through the window, she watched Jonah examine the henhouse, then scan the horizon as if searching for something. Or someone. Bill Watson and 2 other hands arrived within minutes, their faces grim as they surveyed the scene. She could see them talking in hushed tones, gesturing toward the south, toward the Double G ranch. When Jonah finally came inside, his shirt was stained with blood from cleaning up the chickens. "Pack a bag," he said without preamble. "What? Why?" "I'm taking you to town. You can stay at the boarding house until—" "No." The word came out sharper than Clara intended. "I'm not leaving." Jonah's eyes flashed. "This is not a discussion. Someone's making threats, and I won't have you caught in the middle of it." "I'm already in the middle of it. I'm your wife, remember? For better or worse." Clara lifted her chin defiantly. "Besides, if I leave now right after the threat, what does that say? That we're afraid. That our marriage isn't real. Our marriage isn't real," Jonah said harshly. The words stung more than Clara expected. "Real enough for the law. Real enough for the North Pasture claim. And real enough that someone wants me gone." Jonah ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Grayson? You think Grayson did this? Who else? He's wanted the North Pasture for years. His father tried to steal it from mine back in '72. Nearly succeeded too until my father caught him forging documents." Clara sank into a kitchen chair, the full weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. "So this is about more than just land. It's about legacy, about revenge. The Graysons don't forgive and they don't forget." Jonah moved to the window, keeping watch. "My father testified against Grayson's father in court. Old man Grayson spent 2 years in prison for fraud. He died there. And now the son wants to take what the father couldn't. Victor's smarter than his father, more patient. He's been slowly buying up land around mine, cutting off my access to markets, trying to strangle the ranch slowly." Jonah's fists clenched. "But the North Pasture was his real goal. With that water source, he could finally force me out." "But we filed the claim. It's legal." "Legal doesn't always matter out here. Grayson has money influence. He owns half the town council, and the sheriff eats dinner at his ranch every Sunday." Clara stood and moved to stand beside him at the window. "Then we can't count on the law to protect us." Jonah looked down at her, surprise flickering in his gray eyes. "I made a bargain with you, Jonah McAllister. I keep my bargains." She met his gaze steadily. "But if I'm going to stay and fight, I need to know everything. No more secrets." For a long moment they stood there, the morning sun casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Finally, Jonah nodded. "There's something else," he said. "The reason I needed a wife so urgently." Grayson had found a loophole in the land claim process. If he could prove I wasn't maintaining a proper household, his lawyer's words, he could challenge the claim. A bachelor rancher doesn't qualify as a proper household, apparently. "How did you know about his plan?" "I have a friend in the land office in Tucson. He warned me 3 months ago. That's when I placed the advertisement for a housekeeper, hoping—" He trailed off. "Hoping one would agree to marry you. Hoping I could convince one to stay long enough to make it look legitimate. The marriage idea came later when I realized half measures wouldn't work." Clara absorbed this information, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "The other housekeepers who left, did Grayson threaten them too?" "The first one, no. She genuinely couldn't handle the isolation. The second received a better offer from Grayson himself, triple wages, to work at the Double G. The third—" He hesitated. "She left in the middle of the night. Never said why, but I found her room ransacked as if someone had been searching for something." "What would they be searching for?" "Evidence, maybe. Something to use against me. My father kept detailed records of his dealings with the Graysons. If Victor could get his hands on those, twist them somehow." Clara thought about the chaos she'd found in the study. "The records are all there, aren't they? In that mess of papers. Somewhere. I've been meaning to go through them properly, but I'll do it. I'll organize everything, make sure the important documents are secure." She paused, then added, "We should make copies too. Hide them somewhere safe." Jonah studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're not what I expected, Clara Hastings." "McAllister," she corrected. "Clara McAllister. And what did you expect?" "Someone fragile. Someone who would run at the first sign of trouble." "I've been running my whole life," Clara said quietly. "From the fever that took my parents, from my aunt's expectations, from a marriage that would have killed my soul slowly. I'm tired of running." Before Jonah could respond, Bill Watson appeared at the kitchen door. "Boss, we've got company." They hurried to the front porch to see a group of riders approaching. Not Grayson's men, these wore badges, the sheriff and 3 deputies. Sheriff Coleman was a thin man with a handlebar mustache and eyes that never quite met anyone's gaze directly. He dismounted slowly as if reluctant to be there. "McAllister," he said, nodding to Jonah, then tipping his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, heard you had some trouble out here." "News travels fast," Jonah said dryly. "Mr. Grayson sent word, said he was concerned about vandalism in the area, wanted us to investigate." Clara felt Jonah tense beside her. How thoughtful of Mr. Grayson to be so concerned about our chickens. The sheriff's eyes flickered nervously. "Now, McAllister, no need for that tone. We're just doing our job. Mind if we take a look around?" "Actually, I do mind," Jonah said. "Unless you have a warrant." "No warrant needed if you've got nothing to hide." "The law says otherwise." The sheriff's face reddened. "You claiming someone killed your chickens or not?" "I'm handling it myself. Vigilante justice is illegal, McAllister." "So is trespassing and destroying property, Sheriff. When you're ready to investigate that, let me know." The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, the sheriff turned back to his horse. "You always were too proud for your own good, just like your father. That pride will get you in trouble one day." After they left, Clara touched Jonah's arm. "Why didn't you let them investigate?" "Because they weren't here to investigate. They were here to snoop to find something Grayson could use against us." He looked down at her hand on his arm, and she quickly withdrew it. "Sorry, Don't apologize. We're supposed to be married, remember? We should probably—" He cleared his throat. "We should probably act more like it. In public, I mean." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Of course. For appearances." That afternoon, while Jonah and his men reinforced the ranch's defenses, Clara threw herself into organizing the study. She sorted papers by date and subject, creating a filing system that would make sense to anyone who needed to use it. As she worked, she found fascinating pieces of ranch history receipts for the first cattle correspondence about water rights, and yes, documents related to the Grayson conflict. One letter in particular caught her attention. It was from Jonah's father to a lawyer in Tucson, dated just a month before his death. "I fear Victor Grayson has not abandoned his father's ambitions. He has been making inquiries about our water rights, studying old surveys. There is something he knows or thinks he knows that gives him confidence. Watch him carefully. The North Pasture is more important than just water. There's something else there. Something the old surveys hint at, but don't reveal. I should have investigated years ago, but time is running short now. If anything happens to me, make sure Jonah secures that land at all costs." Clara read the letter 3 times, her mind racing. What had Sam McAllister suspected? What was really hidden in the North Pasture? She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Jonah enter until he spoke. "Finding anything interesting?" Clara showed him the letter. His face darkened as he read it. "I never saw this before, he said. "My father never mentioned any suspicions about the North Pasture beyond its water value. Maybe he was protecting you. Or maybe he didn't have time to tell you before the fever took him." Jonah set the letter down carefully. "He was delirious at the end, kept talking about protecting the legacy, about secrets in the ground. I thought it was the fever talking. What if it wasn't?" They looked at each other, the same thought occurring to both simultaneously. "We need to explore the North Pasture," Clara said. "It's dangerous. If Grayson's men are watching, then we go at night, tonight." Jonah shook his head. "You're not going anywhere near there." "Yes, I am. This affects both of us now. Besides," Clara added with a slight smile, "you need someone to hold the lantern while you dig." "Dig? Who said anything about digging?" "Secrets in the ground." "Come on, Jonah. Your father was trying to tell you something." That evening, as they prepared for their expedition, Clara was surprised when Jonah handed her a rifle. "You know how to use one of these?" "My father taught me when I was young, before he died." "Good. Keep it with you whenever I'm not around." He showed her where he kept ammunition, then added, "There's a pistol in the kitchen drawer too, small but effective at close range." The casualness with which he discussed weapons should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer. Jonah wasn't pretending the danger wasn't real, he was preparing her for it. They waited until well after midnight before setting out. Clara had changed into a pair of Jonah's old trousers and a dark shirt, her hair hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. If Jonah was surprised by her appearance, he didn't show it. They rode in silence, taking a circuitous route to avoid the main trails. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light and deep shadows. Clara had never ridden at night before, and she found it both terrifying and exhilarating. The north pasture was a valley between two ridges with a stream running through its center. Even in the moonlight, Clara could see why it was so valuable. The grass was thick and green, fed by the precious water. "My father used to bring me here when I was a boy," Jonah said softly. "Said this land was the heart of the ranch. Without it, everything else would die." They dismounted near a cluster of rocks that formed a natural shelter. Jonah had brought a shovel and pickaxe, though neither was sure exactly what they were looking for. "Your father's letter mentioned old surveys," Clara said, keeping her voice low. "Were there any landmarks noted? Unusual features?" Jonah thought for a moment. "There's a Native American marker stone near the eastern ridge, supposedly marks an old trail." They made their way to the eastern ridge, finding the marker stone a tall rock with symbols carved into its surface. Clara held the lantern while Jonah examined the ground around it. "Look," she said, pointing to a depression in the earth near the base of the stone. "The ground's been disturbed here, but not recently. See how the grass has grown over it." Jonah began to dig carefully. About 3 feet down, his shovel hit something solid, not rock metal. Working together, they unearthed a metal box, rusty but intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents. Clara held the lantern close as Jonah unfolded them carefully. "Mining claims," he breathed. "Dated 1858, before the ranch was established." Clara read over his shoulder. "Silver deposits, substantial ones according to the survey. My grandfather's name is on these claims. I never knew he'd been in Arizona that early. Which means the McAllisters have the legal right to any silver found on this land. That's what Grayson's after. Not just the water, the mineral rights." A branch snapped nearby. Jonah immediately pushed Clara behind the marker stone, his hand going to his gun. Well, well," a voice called out. "Working awful late, aren't you, McAllister?" 3 men emerged from the shadows, all armed. Clara recognized one from town. He worked at the Double G. "This is my land, Harker," Jonah said evenly. "I can work it whenever I please." "Mr. Grayson might disagree with that. Might say you're disturbing the peace, digging around in the middle of the night. Suspicious behavior, some might call it. And following us here, what would some call that?" Harker smiled unpleasantly. "Making sure our neighbors are safe. Lot of dangerous folk around these days. Why, someone killed a whole henhouse full of chickens just this morning. Get off my land. Or what? You'll shoot 3 men in cold blood. Don't think your pretty new wife would like being married to a murderer." Clara's grip tightened on the rifle Jonah had given her. She'd stayed hidden so far, but she could see the situation escalating. "Last warning, Harker. You always were too proud, McAllister, just like your daddy, and look what happened to him." The implication in Harker's words was clear. Clara saw Jonah's hand move toward his gun and knew that in seconds violence would erupt. She stepped out from behind the stone rifle raised. "Actually, I wouldn't mind being married to a man who defends what's his, but I'd rather not be a widow just yet." The 3 men started, clearly not expecting her to be armed. "Mrs. McAllister," Harker said, recovering quickly, "this ain't no place for a lady." Then it's fortunate I'm not feeling particularly ladylike at the moment." She kept the rifle steady, aimed at Harker's chest. "My husband asked you to leave. I'm asking less politely." "You wouldn't shoot." Clara shifted her aim slightly and fired the bullet, striking the ground inches from Harker's foot. The sound echoed across the valley. "The next one won't miss," she said calmly, working the rifle's lever to chamber another round. "My father taught me to shoot rabbits back in Kansas. They're much smaller targets than you." Harker's face had gone pale. "This ain't over, McAllister." "Yes?" Jonah said, moving to stand beside Clara. "It is." You tell Grayson we found what he was looking for. Tell him the McAllister claim to this land goes back further than he thought. And tell him if any of his men set foot on my property again, they'll be met with bullets, not words." The three men backed away slowly, then mounted their horses and rode off. Clara didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. "You could have been killed," Jonah said, his voice rough with emotion she couldn't identify. "So could you." Her hands began to shake as the adrenaline wore off. "I told you I'm tired of running." Jonah took the rifle from her trembling hands. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen." "Probably both." To her surprise, he laughed a real, genuine laugh that transformed his stern features. "Come on, we need to get back before they return with reinforcements." They quickly reburied the empty metal box, but took the documents with them. As they rode back to the ranch, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed a line tonight. The conflict with Grayson had moved from threats to confrontation. Back at the ranch, Jonah insisted on checking all the doors and windows. While Clara made coffee, neither of them would sleep now. They sat at the kitchen table, the mining claims spread between them. "These change everything," Jonah said. "With proof of mineral rights predating Grayson's claims, he has no legal standing. But he's not going to give up." "No. If anything, this will make him more desperate." Jonah looked at her across the table. "You can still leave. I'll give you the money for passage anywhere you want to go. This isn't your fight." Clara met his gaze steadily. "You're right. It's not my fight. It's our fight. I'm your wife, Jonah. Maybe it started as a business arrangement, but somewhere between yesterday's breakfast and tonight's confrontation, it became something more. At least for me." The words hung in the air between them. Jonah's expression was unreadable in the lamplight. "Clara, you don't have to say anything. I know what our arrangement is. But I'm choosing to stay not because of our contract, but because I want to. Because this ranch, this life, it means something to me now." Jonah reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You constantly surprise me, Clara McAllister." "Good surprises or bad?" "Good. Definitely good." They sat like that for a moment, hands touching the danger outside, temporarily forgotten. Then Jonah pulled away, clearing his throat. "We should get those documents to the land office in Tucson. The sooner they're officially recorded, the better." "When?" "Tomorrow. Both of us should go, it'll be safer together, and they'll need both our signatures as a married couple." Clara nodded, trying not to focus on the warmth that lingered where his hand had touched hers. "I'll pack supplies for the journey." The next morning they set out before dawn, taking a longer but less traveled route to Tucson. Bill Watson was left in charge of the ranch with strict instructions to send word if Grayson's men caused any trouble. The journey took most of the day. They talked more than they had in the entire week since their marriage. About the ranch, about their childhoods, about dreams they'd had before life forced them down unexpected paths. "I wanted to be a teacher," Clara admitted as they stopped to water the horses. "I loved books, loved learning. But after my parents died, my aunt said education was wasted on women who'd just end up married anyway." "My mother was educated," Jonah said. "She could quote Shakespeare and solve mathematical equations that made my head spin. My father said it was her intelligence that first attracted him, that, and her stubbornness." "She sounds wonderful." "She was. She would have liked you." He paused, then added quietly, "You remind me of her sometimes. That same fierce determination." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her, and Clara treasured it. Tucson was larger than Copper Creek, with proper streets and buildings that looked permanent rather than provisional. The land office was a solid brick structure with the territorial seal above the door. The clerk, a young man with spectacles and nervous hands, became increasingly excited as he examined the mining claims. "These are extraordinary, Mr. McAllister. Pre-territorial claims with proper documentation. They supersede almost everything else in the region." "We need them officially recorded and copies made," Jonah said. "Certified copies." Of course. This will take about an hour. Would you mind waiting?" They spent the hour walking through Tucson's market district. Clara was amazed by the variety of goods available: fresh produce, imported fabrics, books. Jonah bought her a new dress despite her protests. "Your other clothes are wearing thin," he said practically. "Consider it a business expense. A rancher's wife needs to look respectable." But when she tried it on and emerged from the shop, his expression suggested he saw more than just respectability. "You look, that color suits you." It was deep green, bringing out the color of her eyes. Clara felt herself blushing under his gaze. They were walking back to the land office when Clara spotted a familiar figure across the street, Victor Grayson talking animatedly with a man in an expensive suit. "Jonah?" she said quietly, touching his arm. He followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "That's Judge Harrison from Phoenix. Grayson's probably trying to find a legal way around our claim. Should we be worried?" "We should be careful. Come on." They retrieved their certified documents and started back toward Copper Creek, but as they left Tucson's limits, Jonah suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. "Someone's following us." Clara looked back but saw nothing. "Are you sure?" "I've been watching for the last mile. They're staying just out of sight, but they're there." He surveyed the landscape ahead. "There's a box canyon about 2 miles ahead. We're going to ride in there and wait." "Isn't that dangerous? We'd be trapped." "Or they would be." The canyon was narrow with high walls and only one entrance. Jonah positioned their horses behind a large boulder and drew his rifle. "Whatever happens, stay behind cover," he instructed Clara. They didn't have to wait long. 3 riders appeared at the canyon mouth, the same men from the north pasture. "We know you're in there, McAllister," Harker called. "Why don't you come out and we can discuss this like civilized men?" "Nothing civilized about ambushing travelers," Jonah called back. "Mr. Grayson just wants to talk. Make you a generous offer for those papers you filed today." "Not for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right price. How about we start with $10,000? Clara gasped. That was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. "Not interested," Jonah said. $20,000. "Harker, you could offer me all the gold in California, and my answer would be the same. This land is my family's legacy. It's not for sale." "Then we'll have to take it." The first shot shattered the desert silence. Clara pressed herself against the boulder as bullets whined overhead. Jonah returned fire, methodically forcing the attackers to take cover. "Can you reach my saddlebags?" he asked Clara between shots. She nodded, crawling carefully to his horse and retrieving the bags. "There's extra ammunition in there, and something else, a signal flare. My father used them to call for help from the ranch hands." Clara found the flare, a thick red stick with a fuse. "How do we light it?" "Matches in my pocket. You'll have to—" He fired again, then cursed. "They're trying to flank us." Clara could see one of the men attempting to climb the canyon wall to get a better angle. Without thinking, she grabbed Jonah's pistol and fired, forcing the man to scramble back down. "Light the flare," Jonah ordered. "Hold it high and let it burn. If any of our people are within 5 miles, they'll see it." Clara struck the match with trembling fingers and lit the flare. Red smoke billowed up, visible against the clear sky. She held it as high as she dared, praying someone would see it. The gunfight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then suddenly Harker called out, "Riders coming! Let's get out of here!" The 3 men retreated, galloping away as a dust cloud approached from the direction of Copper Creek. But it wasn't ranch hands who appeared, it was Sheriff Coleman and his deputies. "Heard gunfire?" the sheriff said, surveying the scene. "Everyone all right?" "We were ambushed," Jonah said. "Grayson's men. They're probably halfway back to the Double G by now." The sheriff's expression was skeptical. "You claiming Victor Grayson ordered an attack on you. I'm claiming 3 men who work for him tried to rob us." "Rob you of what?" Jonah held up the leather portfolio containing the mining claims. "Legal documents. Papers that prove the McAllister family's claim to mineral rights in the North Pasture." The sheriff's eyes widened slightly. He knew about the silver rumors then. "Without witnesses or evidence, there's not much I can do," he said finally. "There's bullet holes in these rocks," Clara pointed out angrily. "Isn't that evidence?" "Could have been anyone shooting at anyone, ma'am. Desert's a dangerous place." Jonah stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Coleman, you're either incompetent or corrupt. Either way, you're useless. Don't bother coming to Ironwood Ranch again unless you're prepared to do your actual job." The sheriff's face reddened. "You threatening me, McAllister?" "I'm telling you that from now on we protect ourselves. Anyone who comes onto my land with hostile intent will be met with force. Legal force defending our property and lives. Make sure Grayson understands that." The ride back to the ranch was tense. Clara could feel Jonah's anger radiating from him like heat from a fire. "This isn't over," he said finally. "I know. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I know that too." He looked at her, then really looked at her. "Why aren't you afraid?" Clara considered the question. "I am afraid. But I'm more afraid of running again, of never having anything worth fighting for." "And this is worth fighting for. A ranch you've known for a week, a marriage that's barely real." "It feels real to me," Clara said quietly, "when you held my hand last night, when you bought me this dress, when we stood together against those men. It all feels very real." Jonah didn't respond, but she saw his hands tighten on the reins. As they approached the ranch, they could see lights blazing in every window. Bill Watson met them at the gate relief, evident on his weathered face. "Thank God you're safe. We saw the signal flare but couldn't leave the ranch undefended. There's been trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Jonah demanded. "Someone poisoned the water tank. We caught it in time. None of the cattle drank from it, but if we hadn't noticed the smell..." Jonah dismounted, his face dark with rage. "They're trying to destroy us piece by piece." "There's more," Bill said reluctantly. A message was delivered. From Grayson. He handed Jonah an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper with elegant handwriting, "Mr. McAllister. I regret that our business discussions have become contentious. I propose a meeting tomorrow at noon, neutral ground, the mission at San Rafael. Come alone and we can resolve this matter like gentlemen. Refuse and I cannot guarantee the safety of your lovely wife. V. Grayson." Clara read it over Jonah's shoulder, her blood running cold at the threat. "You can't go," she said immediately. "It's obviously a trap." "I have to. He's threatened you directly now." "Then we go to the federal marshals. This is beyond what Sheriff Coleman..." "The nearest federal marshal is 3 days' ride away. By the time he got here..." Jonah crumpled the letter in his fist. "No, this ends tomorrow." Clara spent the night pacing her room, unable to sleep, knowing what morning would bring. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jonah moving about, preparing for what might be his last sunrise. At 3 a.m, she couldn't stand it anymore. She knocked softly on his door. "Come in." His voice was rough, tired. She found him sitting at his desk, writing by lamplight. His rifle leaned against the wall, freshly cleaned. His pistol lay on the desk beside several boxes of ammunition. "Writing your will?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Instructions for Bill, in case..." He set down his pen. "The ranch would go to you, of course. As my widow, you'd inherit everything." "Stop talking like you're already dead." "I'm being practical." "You're being fatalistic." Clara moved closer, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." He stood towering over her in the small room. "Grayson's made his play. If I don't show up tomorrow, he'll know I'm weak. The attacks will escalate. But if you face him, he'll kill you." "Maybe. Maybe not. I'm a better shot than most people know." "This isn't about marksmanship, Jonah. He's not planning a fair fight. He'll have men hidden rifles trained on you the moment you arrive." "Probably." His casual acceptance of danger infuriated her. "So you're just going to walk into a trap. Leave me here to face Grayson alone." Something flickered in his eyes. "You wouldn't be alone. Bill would protect you. The hands are loyal." "I don't want their protection. I want..." She stopped, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. "What do you want, Clara?" The question hung between them in the lamplight. She wanted to tell him the truth that in 1 week he'd become more important to her than any person had been since her parents died. That the thought of losing him terrified her more than any threat Grayson could make. That their marriage might have started as a business arrangement, but her heart hadn't gotten that message. Instead, she said, "I want you to stop being noble and start being smart." "What do you suggest? Take me with you?" "Absolutely not." "Hear me out. Grayson won't expect it. He told you to come alone, but showing up with your wife sends a different message that we're united, that you're not afraid, that you trust me enough to have me by your side." "It's too dangerous." "Everything about this situation is dangerous. At least together we can watch each other's backs." Jonah was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No." Stubborn woman. You knew that when you married me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I suppose I did. He moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I am, you'd have to do exactly as I say. No heroics like in the canyon. Agreed. And you'd stay with the horses ready to ride at the first sign of trouble. Jonah, those are my terms. Clara knew this was the best offer she'd going to get. Fine. He turned back to her, and for a moment she thought he might say something else, something important. Instead, he picked up his pen again. You should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. But Clara didn't go back to her room. She sat in the kitchen cleaning and loading the pistol Jonah had given her, watching the eastern skies slowly lighten. When Bill Watson arrived at dawn, she had coffee ready and a plan forming in her mind. Bill, she said quietly while Jonah was saddling the horses, I need you to do something for me. The foreman's weathered face creased with concern. What kind of something? I need you and 2 men you trust to follow us to San Rafael. Stay out of sight, but be ready. Boss won't like that. The boss doesn't need to know. Please, Bill. I have a bad feeling about this. Bill studied her for a moment, then nodded. We'll be there, ma'am. You have my word. The mission at San Rafael was a half-day's ride north, an abandoned Spanish church that had been empty for 20 years since the last Apache raids. It sat in a valley between 2 ridges, its adobe walls crumbling but still standing a monument to failed dreams of civilization in the desert. As they approached, Clara could see why Grayson had chosen this spot. The ridges provided perfect positions for hidden gunmen, and the mission itself offered only one entrance through the main chapel doors. Stay alert, Jonah murmured, scanning the ridges. If you see anything... I know. They dismounted near a cluster of cottonwood trees about 50 yards from the mission. Jonah checked his weapons one more time, then looked at Clara. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. Clara, listen to me. If something happens, you ride. Don't look back. Don't try to help. Just ride to town and wire the federal marshals. Jonah? He cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. Promise me. She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a blessing or a farewell, she couldn't tell which. Then he was walking toward the mission, his stride confident despite the danger. Clara watched from the trees, her hand on her pistol, every nerve screaming danger. The chapel doors opened before Jonah reached them. Victor Grayson emerged dressed in an expensive black suit that seemed absurd in the desert setting. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, hands resting on their guns. McAllister, Grayson called out. I wasn't sure you'd come. You threatened my wife. That didn't leave me much choice. Ah, yes, the lovely Clara. From housekeeper to wife in one day. Quite the advancement for a woman with no prospects. Clara saw Jonah's hands clench, but his voice remained even. Say what you came to say, Grayson. Straight to business. Very well. Grayson pulled out a document. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for the North Pasture and all associated mineral rights. It's more than fair. I told you before, it's not for sale. Everything's for sale, McAllister. It's just a matter of price. Not my family's legacy. Grayson's pleasant mask slipped, revealing something cold and dangerous underneath. Your family's legacy. Your grandfather was a fraud just like my father claimed. Those mining documents are forgeries. The land office verified them yesterday. The land office can be persuaded to reconsider, especially when new evidence comes to light. What evidence? Grayson smiled. The testimony of someone who was there when your grandfather supposedly filed those claims. Someone who's prepared to swear that old Jonas McAllister was nowhere near Arizona in 1858. Clara's blood ran cold. If Grayson had manufactured a witness, you're lying, Jonah said. Am I? Would you bet your ranch on it? Your wife's safety. Grayson took a step closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over the North Pasture to me today. In exchange, I'll pay you enough to start over somewhere else. California, maybe. Or back east. Take your pretty wife and disappear. And if I refuse, then things will get unpleasant. More poisoned water, dead cattle, burned buildings, and eventually, tragically, something might happen to that wife you're so protective of. The desert is dangerous after all. Accidents happen all the time. The threat was explicit, now hanging in the air like smoke. Clara watched Jonah's hand move toward his gun. That would be unwise, Grayson said. Several rifle barrels appeared in the mission windows, all trained on Jonah. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Maybe. But I'd still have time to put a bullet in you before they got me. Would you leaving your widow to face my men alone? It was then that Clara heard the distant rumble of horses. Many horses approaching fast. Grayson heard it too, his eyes narrowing. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, and as it grew closer, Clara could make out riders. Not just Bill, and 2 hands, at least a dozen men, all armed. What is this? Grayson demanded. Judge Thompson from Copper Creek rode at the head of the group with Mrs. Thompson beside him. Behind them were Bill Watson, several Ironwood ranch hands, and surprisingly some townspeople Clara recognized from her first day. It's called witnesses, Koa, the judge called out as they approached. Mrs. McAllister sent word that there might be trouble here. Thought we should come see for ourselves. Clara's heart leapt. Bill must have rallied more support than she'd asked for. This is a private business discussion, Grayson said coldly. On neutral ground, Judge Thompson replied, which makes it public enough. Now what's this about threats against Mrs. McAllister? There have been no threats, Grayson said quickly. That's not what we just heard? Mrs. Thompson spoke up. Several of us were close enough to hear you threaten both Mr. and Mrs. McAllister with violence if they didn't sign over their land. The rifles in the mission windows had disappeared, their operators apparently unwilling to shoot with so many witnesses present. Grayson's face was turning red with rage. You've made a mistake, McAllister. This isn't over. Yes, it is, a new voice said. Everyone turned to see a man in a federal marshal's badge riding up. He was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and a confident bearing. Marshal James Garrett, he announced. I received a wire yesterday about threats and attempted murder in this area. He looked directly at Grayson. Mr. Grayson, I'll need you and your men to come with me for questioning. This is preposterous. You have no evidence. I have testimony from several witnesses about today's threats. I have a poisoned water tank at the Ironwood Ranch. I have dead livestock. And he pulled out a telegram. I have a very interesting wire from the land office in Phoenix about someone attempting to bribe officials to falsify documents. Grayson went pale. You can't prove anything. Maybe not yet, but I can hold you for 48 hours while I investigate. Your men too. The marshal gestured, and Clara noticed several more badges among the riders. Gentlemen, please surrender your weapons. What followed was tense but brief. Outnumbered and facing federal authority, Grayson's men complied. As they were being disarmed, Grayson walked past Jonah. This isn't finished, he said quietly. I have lawyers' connections. You've won a battle, not the war. Maybe, Jonah replied. But you've lost the element of surprise. Everyone knows what you are now. As Grayson was led away, Clara left her position by the trees and ran to Jonah. He caught her in his arms, holding her tightly. You sent for help, he said into her hair. You were walking into a trap. I couldn't just... He pulled back to look at her. You saved my life. You saved mine first, when you offered me marriage instead of sending me away. Judge Thompson approached, a knowing smile on his face. Quite the actress, Mrs. McAllister. That scared wife routine in your letter was very convincing. Clara blushed. I wasn't entirely acting. No, I imagine not. He looked between them. You know, in all my years of performing marriages, I've rarely seen a couple who belonged together more, even if they didn't know it at the time. After the crowd dispersed and Grayson's men were taken away, Jonah and Clara rode slowly back to the ranch. The crisis had passed, at least for now, but there was something unfinished between them, words that needed to be said. You took a huge risk, Jonah said finally. So did you. I mean, sending that letter rallying the town. If Grayson had found out. But he didn't. Clara paused, then added, I couldn't lose you. Jonah reined in his horse. Clara, I know what our arrangement is. I know this is just business. But somewhere in the last week, you became important to me. More important than I expected or wanted. He dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. It stopped being just business for me the moment you stepped out from behind that rock with a rifle ready to defend land you'd never seen before. Really? Maybe even before that. Maybe the moment you demanded to read the marriage contract while walking to the justice of the peace, making sure you were protected even while desperate. Clara's heart was racing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'm glad you answered that advertisement. I'm glad you were brave enough or desperate enough to agree to my insane proposal. And I'm glad you're too stubborn to run when things got dangerous. Is that your way of saying you loved me? Jonah cupped her face in his hands, the same gesture as earlier, but this time his eyes held warmth instead of fear. I'm saying that what started as a business arrangement has become something I never expected. You've brought life back to that house, Clara. Life and light and hope. You've made it a home again. Jonah, he kissed her then, not the brief brush of lips from their wedding, but a real kiss full of promise and passion and all the words he couldn't seem to say. When they finally broke apart, Clara was breathless. We should get back, he said, his voice rough. Bill will be worried. As they mounted their horses again, Clara asked, What happens now? Grayson won't give up easily. No, but he'll have to be more careful. The federal marshals will be watching him. And we have the documented mineral rights. He can challenge them in court, but that will take years and cost a fortune. So we're safe. Safer. Nothing's ever completely safe out here. He looked at her. Does that worry you? No, Clara said honestly. I knew what I was getting into when I agreed to marry you. Did you? Well, maybe not exactly. I didn't expect gunfights and poisoned water and midnight treasure hunts. But I also didn't expect to find a place where I belonged, or a person who would make me feel brave enough to fight for something. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun painting the desert in shades of gold and red. As the ranch came into view, Clara saw the hands gathered on the porch, obviously waiting for news. Bill Watson was the first to greet them. Everything all right, boss? Everything's fine, Bill, thanks to Clara's quick thinking. Bill grinned. Ma'am's got more grit than most men I know. That evening, for the first time since their marriage, the ranch felt alive. The hands ate dinner at the main house instead of the bunkhouse, sharing stories and laughter. Clara cooked a feast with supplies from town, and even Jonah relaxed enough to tell a few tales from his childhood. As the evening wore on and the hands returned to their quarters, Clara and Jonah sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. My father used to say that the desert either makes you stronger or breaks you, Jonah said. No middle ground. Which did it do to you? I thought it had broken me when my parents died. I shut everyone out, focused on survival, on keeping the ranch going, but not on living. And now, he took her hand, interlacing their fingers. Now I think maybe it was making me stronger, preparing me for you. Clara leaned against his shoulder. That's very romantic for a practical rancher. You're a bad influence. Good. They sat in silence for a while, then Jonah spoke again, his voice tentative. Clara, about our sleeping arrangements. She sat up looking at him. Yes. That first night I said you'd have your own room, that this was a business arrangement. I remember. I was wondering if you wanted... He stopped, frustrated. I'm not good at this. Clara smiled. Are you trying to ask if I want our marriage to be real in every way? Yes. Yes. He looked at her, surprise and hope warring in his expression. Yes. Yes, Jonah. Although I do have one condition. His face fell slightly. What condition? I want to hear you say it, the words. He stood, pulling her up with him, and wrapped his arms around her. I love you, Clara McAllister. I love your courage and your stubbornness and the way you make terrible coffee, but excellent biscuits. I love that you can shoot a rifle and balance account books and stand up to men like Grayson without flinching. I love you. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. I have since that night in the North Pasture when you tried to protect me even though I'd put myself in danger. He kissed her again, and this time there was no urgency, no desperation, just the sweetness of two people who had found each other against all odds. When they finally went inside, it was together to the room that would now be theirs. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Marshal Garrett returned with news that made Clara's blood run cold. "Grayson's escaped," he said without preamble. "Killed one of my deputies and disappeared in the night. We're searching, but he knows this territory better than most." Jonah's face was grim. "He'll come here." "Probably. I'm leaving 2 men to watch the ranch, but you should be prepared." After the marshal left, Jonah began preparing for siege. Weapons were cleaned and loaded, ammunition distributed, watch schedules established. Clara found herself in the middle of a war council, the ranch hands discussing defensive positions and escape routes. "I want you to go to town," Jonah told her privately. "Stay with the Thompsons until this is over." "We've had this discussion. I'm not leaving." "Clara, I'm your wife, Jonah. For better or worse, remember, this is the worst part. I'm staying." He pulled her into his arms. "I can't lose you." "Then make sure you don't." That night Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at the bedroom window watching the desert when she saw them shadows moving where shadows shouldn't be. "Jonah," she whispered, waking him. "They're here." He was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle. "How many?" "I can't tell. At least 6, maybe more." He dressed quickly and silently. "Wake Bill, quietly. I'll check the other windows." Clara crept to the foreman's room and roused him. Within minutes, the ranch defenders were in position waiting for an attack that seemed inevitable. It came just before dawn. The first shot shattered the kitchen window. Clara, positioned behind an overturned table, returned fire, while Jonah and Bill defended the front of the house. The ranch hands fought from the bunkhouse and barn, creating a crossfire that kept the attackers at bay. "They're trying to burn us out," someone shouted. Clara could smell smoke. The barn was on fire. "If it spread to the house—" "I'll go," she said. "No." Jonah grabbed her arm. "It's too dangerous." "Someone has to, and you're needed here." Before he could stop her, she was running. The barn was fully engulfed, but the horses had been released and were fleeing to safety. Clara grabbed buckets and began throwing water on the side of the house nearest the barn, trying to keep the fire from spreading. A figure emerged from the smoke. Grayson himself, his face twisted with rage and madness. "You ruined everything," he snarled, raising his gun. Clara threw the bucket at him and dove sideways as he fired. The bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her around, but she managed to pull her pistol. They faced each other in the firelight, both armed, both desperate. "You won't shoot," Grayson said. "You're just a city girl playing at being a rancher's wife." "I already shot at your man Harker," Clara reminded him, "and that was before you tried to kill my husband." "Your husband killed my father. Oh, not directly, but his testimony sent him to prison where he died. The McAllisters took everything from my family. Your father was a thief and a fraud. He destroyed himself." Grayson's face contorted. "The silver should have been ours. The land should have been ours. You've taken it all." He raised his gun, and Clara knew with terrible clarity that one of them was about to die. The shot was impossibly loud. Grayson stood for a moment, looking surprised, then collapsed. Behind him stood Jonah, his smoking rifle still raised. "Clara." He ran to her, seeing the blood on her shoulder. "You're hit." "Just grazed. I'm fine." But her legs gave out and he caught her. The fire was dying down, the attack failing as Grayson's men saw their leader fall. In the distance, Clara could hear horses, the marshal returning with reinforcements drawn by the smoke and gunfire. "Is it over?" she asked, leaning against Jonah. "Yes, it's over." Marshal Garrett surveyed the scene with professional detachment. Grayson's body was covered with a blanket, his men rounded up and arrested. The barn was a total loss, but the house, and more importantly, the people were safe. "Self-defense," the marshal declared after taking statements. "Clear case. Grayson came here armed and with violent intent." As the doctor from town treated Clara's shoulder, Jonah never left her side. "You could have been killed," he said for the 10th time, "but I wasn't. You ran into gunfire to save the house. Our house, our home. Worth fighting for, remember?" He kissed her forehead gently. "You're impossible. You love me anyway." "God help me, I do." The doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes, chuckled. "You two remind me of my wife and me when we were young. Fought our way through Apache raids, drought, and a range war. Been married 43 years now." "Any advice?" Clara asked. Keep fighting for each other the way you fight for this land. The rest will take care of itself." As dawn broke, fully revealing the damage but also the survival of the Ironwood Ranch, Clara realized the doctor was right. They'd fought for this land, for this life, for each other, and they'd won. "We'll need to rebuild the barn," Jonah said, ever practical. "And get new chickens," Clara added, "and figure out what to do about those mineral rights. And maybe add a room or two to the house." Jonah looked at her curiously. "Why would we need more rooms?" Clara smiled mysteriously. "Oh, I can think of a reason or two. In time." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by joy. "Clara, are you saying—" "I'm saying that in about 7 months, there's going to be another McAllister on this ranch." He swept her into his arms, shoulder injury forgotten, and kissed her thoroughly while the doctor laughed and the ranch hands cheered. "When did you know?" Jonah asked when he finally set her down. "I suspected yesterday. I was going to tell you last night, but then—" She gestured to the chaos around them. "We conceived a child in the middle of all this danger." "We conceived a child in the middle of falling in love," Clara corrected. "The danger was just background noise." The weeks that followed Grayson's death brought an unexpected peace to the Ironwood Ranch. Clara's shoulder healed quickly, leaving only a thin scar that Jonah would trace with his fingers in quiet moments, a reminder of how close he'd come to losing her. The barn was rebuilt with help from the townspeople, many of whom had come to respect the young couple who'd stood against Grayson's tyranny. Clara threw herself into managing the ranch's books, while her body adjusted to the changes of early pregnancy. Morning sickness hit her hard, though she tried to hide it from Jonah, not wanting him to worry more than he already did. "You're green as spring grass," he said one morning, finding her bent over the wash basin. "Maybe you should rest." "I'm fine," she insisted, then immediately proved herself wrong by retching again. He held her hair back, his touch gentle. "Clara, you don't have to be strong every moment." "Yes, I do. This ranch doesn't run itself and you can't manage everything alone." "I did before you came." "Badly," she reminded him with a weak smile. "Your books were a disaster, remember." He helped her back to bed despite her protests. "The books can wait. You're growing our child. That's more important than anything." It was during one of these enforced rest periods that Bill Watson brought disturbing news. He entered the house with his hat in his hands, his weathered face creased with worry. "Boss, we've got a problem. Someone's been asking questions in town about the mining claims." Jonah's expression darkened. "Grayson's lawyers." "No, sir. Government men. From Washington." Clara sat up straighter. "What kind of government men?" "Upon Bureau of Land Management," they said. "They're reviewing all claims filed before 1860. Something about irregularities in the documentation process." Jonah cursed under his breath. Grayson must have set this in motion before he died. One last attempt to steal what he couldn't take by force. "What do we do?" Clara asked. "We fight it legally this time." Jonah looked at Bill. "Send word to that lawyer in Tucson, Harrison. Tell him we need him here as soon as possible." The lawyer arrived 3 days later, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous habit of adjusting his collar. He reviewed their documents with meticulous care while Clara served coffee and tried not to let her anxiety show. "The claims appear legitimate," Harrison said finally, "but the government has broad powers when it comes to land disputes. They could tie this up in court for years." "We don't have years," Jonah said. "Without the certainty of those mineral rights, we can't get loans for improvements, can't make long-term plans." "There might be another way," the lawyer said slowly. "If you could prove active mining operations establish that you're actually using the claimed resources, it would strengthen your position considerably." Clara and Jonah exchanged glances. "We're ranchers, not miners," Jonah said. "Then you might want to become miners, at least temporarily. The government is less likely to revoke claims that are being actively worked." After the lawyer left, Jonah stood at the window, tension radiating from his shoulders. Clara moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "We'll figure it out," she said. "I don't know anything about mining. My father never pursued it, said ranching was cleaner work." "Then we learn. We've learned everything else together." He turned in her arms, looking down at her with wonder. "How do you stay so optimistic?" "Because I have faith in us. We survived Grayson. We can survive bureaucrats." The next morning brought another surprise. A man arrived at the ranch dusty from travel, leading a pack mule loaded with equipment. He was perhaps 50, with grizzled hair and eyes that had seen too much sun. "Name's Ezra Coleman," he announced. "No relation to your worthless sheriff. I hear you folks need a miner." "How did you hear that?" Jonah asked suspiciously. "Word travels, plus that lawyer Harrison told me you might be interested in a business proposition." "What kind of proposition?" Ezra spat tobacco juice into the dust. "I've been mining these territories for 30 years, know every type of ore by sight, smell and taste. You let me work your claim, I take 20% of what we find. You get the rest and the active mining operation you need to keep the government happy." "How do we know you won't cheat us?" Clara asked. Ezra grinned, showing several gold teeth. "Ma'am, I'm too old to cheat anybody. Just want to do some honest work and maybe strike one last vein before I'm too decrepit to swing a pick." They hired him on a trial basis. Within a week, Ezra had identified 3 promising sites in the North Pasture and had begun exploratory digging. Clara often brought him lunch, fascinated by his stories of the mining camps and boom towns he'd seen. "Your land's got silver for sure," he told her one afternoon, holding up a piece of ore. "See that dark veining? That's argentite. Rich stuff if we can find the main vein." "How much silver are we talking about?" "Hard to say, ma'am. Could be a little pocket, could be a fortune. Mining's like that all gamble until you strike it." 2 weeks into the mining operation, the government inspectors arrived. 3 men in city suits looking uncomfortable in the desert heat, carrying briefcases full of forms and regulations. "Mr. McAllister," the lead inspector. A Mr. Pritchard said, "We're here to verify your mining claims and inspect your operations." "Inspect away," Jonas said, though Clara could see the tension in his jaw. The inspectors spent 3 days examining documents, surveying boundaries, and watching Ezra work. They asked endless questions, took copious notes, and maintained expressions of professional neutrality that revealed nothing. On the 3rd evening, Clara decided to take matters into her own hands. She prepared an elaborate dinner using her best recipes and the china that had belonged to Jonah's mother. "Gentlemen," she said, serving generous portions of beef stew, "you must be tired of camp food and restaurant fare. Please enjoy a home-cooked meal." The inspector's professional demeanor softened slightly in the face of good food and Clara's gracious hospitality. As the wine flowed a bottle Jonah had been saving for a special occasion, tongues loosened. "Mrs. McAllister," Pritchard said, "I must commend you on this meal. It reminds me of my mother's cooking." "You're far from home, aren't you?" Clara asked sympathetically. "Baltimore. Haven't seen my family in 3 months." "That must be difficult, and all for paperwork that probably didn't need reviewing in the first place." Pritchard's expression grew uncomfortable. "Well, when complaints are filed, we must investigate." "Complaints from dead men carry a lot of weight in Washington," Jonah asked. "The complaint was filed before Mr. Grayson's death," Pritchard admitted. "He alleged that your grandfather's claims were fraudulent, that he was actually in California in 1858, not Arizona." "My grandfather was many things," Jonah said, "but he wasn't a liar, and he certainly wasn't in California. He hated California, said it was full of fortune seekers and fools." Clara had been thinking about this problem since the inspectors arrived. "Mr. Pritchard, what would constitute proof of my husband's grandfather's presence in Arizona?" "Contemporary documents. Witnesses, though, those would be hard to find now. Any official records from the period." "What about a grave?" Clara asked suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Jonah, you said your grandfather had a brother who died out here in the 1850s. Where is he buried?" Understanding dawned in Jonah's eyes. "The old cemetery behind San Rafael Mission. But what is that? If his brother died here and is buried here, it proves the family was in Arizona. Why would Jonas McAllister be in California if his brother was dying in Arizona?" Pritchard considered this. "If you could prove the death date and that Jonas was present for the burial." "The mission keeps records," Clara said. "Father Miguel showed them to me when we were married. Deaths, births, marriages, all recorded in the church books." The next day they all rode to San Rafael Mission. The current priest, Father Francisco, was young and eager to help. He pulled out the old record books, leather-bound and written in Spanish. "Here," he said, pointing to an entry. "Michael McAllister died August 15, 1858. And here witnesses to the burial, Jonas McAllister brother and Samuel McAllister nephew." Samuel was my father, Jonah said. He would have been just 8 years old. Pritchard examined the record carefully. This is compelling evidence. Combined with your active mining operation and the original claims, I believe we can close this investigation favorably. Relief flooded through Clara so intensely that she swayed on her feet. Jonah steadied her concern in his eyes. Just the heat, she murmured, though they both knew it was more than that. As they rode back to the ranch, Pritchard beside them, the inspector said something unexpected. You know there's silver in that land. Our geological survey confirmed it. Could be worth a fortune if properly developed. We're ranchers, Jonah said. The silver's just insurance. Smart thinking, though you might want to consider expanding the mining operation. The government offers grants for mineral development in the territories, helps build up the local economy. That night, as Clara and Jonah lay in bed, she could feel him thinking. What is it? She asked. Pritchard's suggestion about expanding the mining. It could secure our future, the baby's future. But mining changes places, brings in rough men, creates boom towns. I've seen what it does. My father kept it out for a reason. Clara considered this. What if we did it differently, controlled it, hired local men, limited the operation size? It's never that simple. Money draws trouble like honey draws flies. Then we deal with trouble when it comes. We've gotten pretty good at that. He pulled her closer. When did you become so brave? The day I married you. The next morning, Ezra came running to the house more excited than Clara had ever seen him. We struck it, boss. We struck the main vein. They followed him to the dig site where he'd opened up a new section of tunnel. Even Clara, who knew nothing about mining, could see the thick seam of dark ore running through the rock. How much? Jonah asked. Can't know for sure without proper assaying, but based on what I can see, thousands of dollars worth, maybe tens of thousands. Clara felt Jonah's hand tighten on hers. This changed everything. Word of the strike spread despite their efforts to keep it quiet. Within a week, men began arriving in Copper Creek, prospectors and speculators drawn by the scent of silver. The quiet town began to transform, new businesses opening to serve the influx of people. Judge Thompson visited the ranch, his usual cheerfulness dampened by concern. You've got to be careful, he warned. This kind of wealth brings out the worst in people. You thought Grayson was bad. Wait until you see what greed does to ordinary folks. As if to prove his point, that night someone tried to break into the house. Jonah caught the intruder, a drifter who'd heard about the silver and thought to help himself to some easy money. The man was turned over to the sheriff, but it was clear this was just the beginning. We need more security, Jonah said. More handsmen who can shoot as well as work cattle. I know someone, Bill Watson offered. My nephew Tom. He was an Army sergeant mustered out last year. Good with a gun and honest as they come. Tom Watson arrived a week later, bringing with him 2 other former soldiers. They set up a patrol schedule, turning the ranch into something resembling a military camp. Clara found the constant vigilance exhausting, especially as her pregnancy progressed. The morning sickness had passed, but now she was beginning to show her body changing in ways that both amazed and frustrated her. I feel like a prisoner in my own home, she confided to Mrs. Thompson during one of the older woman's visits. It won't last forever, dear. Once the initial excitement dies down, things will settle. Will they? Or have we just traded one kind of trouble for another? Mrs. Thompson patted her hand. Wealth is its own burden, that's true. But poverty's no blessing either. You and Jonah will find your way. The federal inspectors departed their report favorable, but new challenges arose daily. A group of investors from San Francisco sent representatives offering to buy the mining rights for an astronomical sum. A railroad company expressed interest in running a line through the property. Even a European syndicate made inquiries. Jonah turned them all down, but Clara could see the stress wearing on him. Maybe we should consider selling, she said one evening. Not the ranch, just the mining rights. Let someone else deal with the headaches. And let them tear up the land, bring in hundreds of miners, destroy everything my family built. He shook his head. I'd rather leave it in the ground. Then why don't we... He looked at her in surprise. I'm serious, Clara continued. We've proven the claim secured our rights. We don't have to actively mine it. We can take what Ezra's already extracted, use it to improve the ranch, and then seal the mines. Waste all that wealth. Is it waste if it buys us peace, if it lets us raise our children without armed guards? Jonah considered this. The investors won't stop coming. Then we make it public. Announce that the mines are closed, that we're focusing on ranching. Take away the temptation. It was a radical idea, one that went against every principle of frontier capitalism. But the more they discussed it, the more sense it made. The next day, Jonah called a meeting with all the hands, including Ezra. We're closing the mining operation, he announced. We'll finish extracting what's in the current tunnel, then seal it up. Ezra looked stricken. But boss, we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more. I know, and it'll still be there if we ever need it. But right now we don't. Right now we need peace more than silver. You're crazy, Ezra said bluntly. Nobody walks away from a fortune. We're not walking away. We're choosing. There's a difference. The old miner shook his head but accepted the decision. Over the next month, they extracted enough silver to pay off all ranch debts, fund improvements for the next decade, and establish a trust for their unborn child. Then, as promised, they sealed the mine. The reaction in Copper Creek was immediate and intense. Some called them fools, others admired their principles. The speculators and drifters gradually departed, seeking fortunes elsewhere. The town began to return to its former quiet state. One evening, as Clara and Jonah sat on the porch watching the sunset, she felt the baby move for the first time. She gasped, grabbing Jonah's hand and placing it on her growing belly. There, she whispered. Feel that? His eyes widened as he felt the flutter of movement. Our child. Our future. Are we doing the right thing? Leaving all that wealth in the ground? Clara thought about everything they'd been through, the desperate bargain that brought them together, the violence with Grayson, the brief taste of what silver fever could bring. We have everything we need, she said. A homeland, each other, and soon a family. What's more valuable than that? He kissed her temple. When did you become so wise? The day I decided to trust a stranger who proposed marriage at sunset. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and Clara's advancing pregnancy, a letter arrived that changed everything once again. It was from a law firm in Kansas City addressed to Clara. She read it with trembling hands, then read it again to be sure she understood. What is it? Jonah asked, alarmed by her expression. My aunt died, the one who raised me after my parents passed. I'm sorry. Don't be. We weren't close, especially after I refused Harold Pemberton. She held up the letter. But she left me her boarding house, all of it, the building, the business, everything. Jonah took the letter, reading it carefully. That's worth a considerable amount. $20,000 according to the lawyers, plus ongoing income from the current residents. They looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. We could sell it, Clara said. Use the money for the ranch. Or we could keep it, have property in the city as well as here, diversify our holdings. Clara smiled. Listen to you sounding like a businessman. Your influence. All that book learning had to rub off eventually. The irony wasn't lost on Clara. She'd fled Kansas City with 47 cents to her name, running from a marriage that would have given her financial security but no freedom. Now she was returning, at least on paper, as a property owner with a husband she loved and a child on the way. I should go, she said. To settle the estate, decide what to do with the property. You're 7 months pregnant. You can't travel that far. Then come with me. Jonah looked torn. I can't leave the ranch for that long, even with Tom and Bill in charge. Then we wait. After the baby's born, after things are settled here. He nodded, but Clara could see him thinking, planning. That night, he surprised her. What if we kept the boarding house, he said. Run it as a secondary business. We could spend winters there when the ranch work is lighter. Our children could get a city education part of the year, learn about more than just cattle and desert. You'd leave the ranch for months at a time. Not leave, expand. Your aunt's boarding house could be a base for selling our cattle to eastern markets. Cut out the middlemen. Clara stared at him in amazement. When did you become so ambitious? When I married a woman who sees possibilities where others see problems. They spent the next weeks planning writing letters to the lawyers in Kansas City, arranging for the boarding house to be managed until they could visit. It gave them something to focus on besides Clara's advancing pregnancy and the lingering tensions from the silver discovery. The baby came early on a cold November night when the first snow of the season dusted the desert. Clara's labor was long and difficult, with only Mrs. Thompson and the town doctor to help. Jonah paced outside like a caged animal, his fear palpable. "If something happens to her," he said to Bill Watson, "nothing's going to happen. That woman's tougher than rawhide. She'll be fine." But as Clara's screams echoed through the house, Jonah's control snapped. He burst into the room despite the doctor's protests. "I'm here," he said, taking Clara's hand. "I'm not leaving." "Jonah," she gasped between contractions. "You shouldn't be with my wife when she needs me. To hell with propriety." His presence gave her strength. When the doctor said push, she pushed. When the pain threatened to overwhelm her, she focused on Jonah's eyes, on his voice, telling her she was brave, she was strong, she could do this. The baby arrived just as the sun rose, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. As Clara held him for the first time, exhausted but euphoric, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. "What should we name him?" Jonah asked, his voice rough with emotion. Clara looked at their son, this child conceived in chaos but born into love. "Samuel," she said. "After your father. Samuel Jonas McAllister." "He would have been proud, Jonah said, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Of the name, of you, of us, of what we've built here." As if to underscore his words, the morning sun broke through the clouds, flooding the room with golden light. Outside, Clara could hear the ranch coming to life. Cowboys calling to each other, horses nickering the eternal rhythm of the land that had become her home. "No regrets?" Jonah asked softly. Clara thought about the desperate woman who'd stood at this door just months ago with 47 cents and nowhere to go. That woman could never have imagined this moment holding her child loved by a man she'd married as a stranger, mistress of a thriving ranch with a fortune in silver sleeping beneath its soil. "No regrets," she said. "Not one." The baby fussed, and she shifted him to nurse, marveling at the instinct that told her what to do. Jonah sat beside them on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. There was just this, their small family, complete and perfect. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Bill Watson entered, hat in hand, grinning broadly. "Sorry to disturb, but thought you'd want to know we've got visitors coming. Lots of them." "Trouble?" Jonah asked, immediately tense. "No, sir. Neighbors, from all around. Word spread about the baby, and they're coming to pay respects. Mrs. Patterson from the Box J brought a quilt. The Hendersons from Twin Peaks have a cradle they made, and I think I saw the Reverend's wagon, too." Clara was touched. In the months of conflict with Grayson and the chaos of the silver discovery, she hadn't realized they'd become part of a community. "Tell them we'll receive visitors this afternoon," Jonah said. "Clara needs rest first." As Bill left, Clara leaned against her husband. "We really did it, didn't we? Built a life here." "We did, though it's not quite what either of us expected when we made that sunset bargain." "No," Clara agreed, looking down at their sleeping son. "It's so much more." The months that followed Samuel's birth transformed the Ironwood Ranch in ways Clara hadn't anticipated. The house that had once echoed with silence now rang with a baby's cries and laughter. She found herself adapting to motherhood while still managing the ranch's books, often working with Samuel sleeping in a basket beside her desk. Spring arrived with unexpected news. Tom Watson burst into the house one morning, his face flushed with excitement and concern. "Mrs. McAllister, there's a woman at the gate. Says she's Mr. McAllister's sister." Clara nearly dropped the coffee pot. In all their conversations, Jonah had never mentioned a sister. "His sister, are you certain?" "That's what she claims. Got the same gray eyes, I'll give her that." Clara found Jonah in the barn helping a mare through a difficult foaling. His hands were gentle but firm as he guided the foal into the world. "Jonah, there's someone here claiming to be your sister." He went completely still. "That's impossible." "Why impossible?" "Because my sister Eleanor has been dead for 10 years. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Died in a fire in San Francisco." "Well, someone who looks remarkably like you is standing at our gate." Jonah wiped his hands on a rag, his movements sharp with agitation. "It's not her. It can't be." But when they reached the front of the house, Jonah stopped dead. The woman standing there was perhaps 30, with dark hair streaked prematurely with silver and those distinctive McAllister gray eyes. She was thin, well-dressed, but travel-worn, and her face showed signs of hard living. "Hello, Jonah," she said quietly. "Eleanor." The name came out as a whisper. "You're dead. They told me you died in the fire." "I should have. I almost did." She pulled down the collar of her dress, slightly revealing terrible burn scars across her neck and shoulder. "But I survived. Barely." 10 years, Jonah said, his voice growing harder. 10 years you let me think you were dead. Let mother and father die thinking they'd lost you. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't come back, not after what I'd done. What you'd done, you were 17 years old. I was old enough to run away with Marcus against father's wishes, old enough to disgrace the family name." Clara watched this reunion with growing understanding. This was why Jonah had been so closed off, so resistant to connection. He'd lost his sister, then his parents, leaving him alone with his grief and guilt. "You should come inside," Clara said gently. "Both of you. This conversation shouldn't happen in the yard." Eleanor looked at her gratefully. "You must be Clara. I heard in town that Jonah had married." "How did you hear about any of this?" Jonah demanded. "How did you even know where to find me?" "Can we please go inside?" Eleanor asked. "I've come a very long way and I need to sit down." Once inside, Clara settled Eleanor in the parlor with tea while Jonah paced like a caged wolf. Samuel began crying from his cradle, and Clara moved to tend him. "You have a child," Eleanor said wonderingly. "A son. Samuel Jonas McAllister." Clara lifted the baby, who immediately quieted. "Your nephew." Eleanor's composure cracked. "I have a nephew. Oh, Jonah, he's beautiful." "You don't get to do that," Jonah said harshly. "You don't get to walk in here after 10 years and play the doting aunt." I know I have no right to anything, but please let me explain." Clara touched Jonah's arm. "Let her talk." Eleanor's story was one of tragedy and survival. The man she'd run away with, Marcus, had turned out to be a gambler and a drunk. The fire that was supposed to have killed her had been his fault. He'd knocked over a lamp during one of his rages. She'd escaped barely, but he hadn't. "I was so badly burned, no one who saw me expected me to live. A Chinese family took me in, nursed me back to health. It took months before I could even walk again." "Why didn't you write—" Jonah's voice was raw with pain. "Just a letter to let us know you were alive." "I was ashamed. I'd defied father runoff with a man who turned out to be a monster and caused a fire that killed 3 people. How could I face any of you after that?" "So you let us grieve instead. Let mother cry herself to sleep every night for a year." Eleanor bowed her head. "I know, it was cowardly, but by the time I'd healed enough to travel, I heard father was ill. Then news came that both he and mother had died. I thought it was better if you believed I was gone too. Cleaner. Easier." "Easier?" Jonah laughed bitterly. "You think losing my entire family was easier? You didn't lose them because of your own stupidity. You could mourn them with clean grief, not the complicated mess of shame and regret I would have brought." Clara watched her husband struggle with years of suppressed emotion. This was the wound that had never healed the loss that had shaped him into the closed-off man who'd proposed marriage to a stranger rather than risk real intimacy. "How did you survive?" Clara asked Eleanor. "How have you been living?" "The Chinese family who saved me taught me their language. I became a translator for merchants doing business between San Francisco and Canton. It's good work, respectable. I've been saving money trying to make something of myself, to become someone who might deserve forgiveness someday." "And you chose now to seek it?" Jonah asked. "I'm dying," Eleanor said simply. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Clara saw Jonah flinch as if he'd been struck. "The doctors say it's consumption, from the smoke damage to my lungs during the fire. I have perhaps a year, maybe less." Eleanor's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "I couldn't die without seeing you again, without apologizing, without meeting your family." Jonah sank into a chair, his face in his hands. Clara had never seen him so vulnerable, so completely undone. "You can't do this," he said, his voice muffled. "You can't come back just to leave again." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Clara made a decision. "You'll stay here." Both siblings looked at her in surprise. "Clara," Jonah began. "She's your sister. She's family, and she's ill. She stays." Clara's tone brooked no argument. "We have room, and God knows this house could use more life in it." "I couldn't impose," Eleanor protested. "It's not an imposition. It's what family does." Clara looked at Jonah. "Isn't that right?" Jonah met her eyes, and she saw gratitude mixed with his anguish. "Yes. You'll stay, Eleanor, for as long as you can." The adjustment wasn't easy. Jonah alternated between anger and desperate attempts to make up for lost time. Eleanor was fragile both physically and emotionally, prone to coughing fits that left her gasping and weak. But gradually, a new rhythm established itself. Eleanor proved to be wonderful, with Samuel telling him stories and singing lullabies Clara had never heard. She also had a sharp mind for business, her years as a translator, having given her insights into international trade that proved valuable as they considered expanding their cattle operations. "You could sell directly to Chinese merchants in San Francisco," she suggested one evening as they reviewed the ranch's accounts. "They pay premium prices for quality beef, and I have connections from my translation work." "That's actually brilliant," Clara said, making notes. "We could bypass the local markets entirely." Jonah watched his wife and sister work together, something softening in his expression. Later, when Eleanor had retired early, as she often did, he pulled Clara into his arms. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what?" "For making me let her stay. For seeing what I was too angry to see, that we needed this time together." "She's part of your history, Jonah. Part of what made you who you are. The man who was so closed off, he had to advertise for a wife." Clara pulled back to look at him. "The man who was so determined to save his family's legacy that he was willing to take a desperate chance. The man who protected me when I was a stranger, who stood against Grayson, who held my hand through childbirth despite all propriety. That man." He kissed her deeply, pouring into it all the emotion he still struggled to express in words. Their renewed peace was shattered 2 weeks later when riders appeared on the horizon. Not threatening this time, but official federal marshals with documents bearing government seals. "Mr. McAllister," the lead marshal said, "I'm afraid there's been a development regarding the Grayson estate." Clara felt her blood chill. "Grayson is dead." "Yes, ma'am, but his estate is not. His lawyers have filed a claim stating that certain documents were hidden during the investigation of his death. Documents that suggest a prior claim to your mineral rights." "That's impossible," Jonah said. "We verified our claims thoroughly." "Nevertheless, a judge has ordered a review. There will be a hearing in Phoenix in 2 weeks. You'll need to appear with all your documentation." After the marshals left, Clara found Jonah in the study surrounded by papers. "It never ends," he said bleakly. "Even dead Grayson haunts us." "Then we end it," Clara said firmly. "Once and for all. We go to Phoenix, we present our case, and we bury this permanently." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, pale from one of her coughing episodes. "I can help." "You're not well enough to travel," Jonah protested. "I'm well enough to testify. I was here in Arizona with Father before I ran away. I remember him talking about grandfather's claims about the silver. My testimony could make a difference." The journey to Phoenix was arduous, especially with Eleanor's fragile health and Samuel's needs. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently, turning what should have been a 3-day journey into 5. Clara watched Jonah hover over his sister, seeing in his protective behavior the brother he'd once been before loss hardened him. Phoenix was larger than Clara had expected, a proper city rising from the desert with brick buildings and paved streets. Their hotel was elegant, with running water and gas lighting luxuries that seemed almost foreign after months on the ranch. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning. That evening, as Clara was preparing Samuel for bed, she heard a knock at their door. Jonah answered it, and she heard a familiar voice that made her stomach drop. "Harold Pemberton," the voice said smoothly. "Mr. McAllister, I believe we have business to discuss." Clara emerged from the bedroom, Samuel in her arms, to find her aunt's chosen suitor standing in their parlor. He was exactly as she remembered, portly, well-dressed, with cold eyes that evaluated everything in terms of its monetary value. "Clara," Harold said, his gaze traveling over her dismissively, "motherhood appears to agree with you." "What are you doing here?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "I represent the Grayson estate now. When I heard about this case and discovered your involvement, I couldn't resist taking it on." "You're a businessman, not a lawyer," Jonah said. "I'm many things, Mr. McAllister, including someone with a vested interest in seeing Clara receive her comeuppance for her rejection of my generous offer." "Get out," Jonah said quietly, dangerously. "Certainly. But we'll see each other tomorrow in court. Oh, and Clara, your aunt left you that boarding house, I hear. Pity she didn't know what kind of woman she was rewarding, one who runs off to marry a stranger rather than accept a respectable proposal." After he left, Clara sank into a chair, shaking. "He's going to try to destroy us out of spite." "Let him try," Jonah said, but she could see the concern in his eyes. Eleanor spoke up from where she'd been quietly observing. "Who is he exactly?" Clara explained about Harold's proposal, her flight to Arizona, the circumstances that had led to her marriage to Jonah. "So you chose love over money," Eleanor summarized. "I chose freedom over captivity," Clara corrected. "The love came later." "Either way, you chose better than I did," Eleanor said with a sad smile. "And this Harold person is about to learn what happens when someone threatens the McAllister family." The courthouse in Phoenix was an imposing building with marble floors and high ceilings. The courtroom was packed, word having spread about the case involving silver rights worth a fortune. Clara recognized several faces from Copper Creek, including Judge and Mrs. Thompson, who had come to support them. Harold Pemberton sat at the plaintiff's table with two other lawyers looking confident and well-prepared. He'd gained weight since Clara had last seen him, his face now florid with good living and self-importance. The judge, an elderly man with sharp eyes, called the court to order. Harold presented his case first, producing documents that supposedly showed the Grayson family had filed mining claims in 1857, a year before Jonas McAllister. "These papers were hidden by Victor Grayson's father," Harold argued. "Hidden because he knew they would cause controversy, but they are legitimate and predate any McAllister claim." Clara studied the documents as they were passed around. Something about them bothered her. The ink looked too fresh, the paper too crisp for something supposedly 60 years old. When it was their turn, Jonah's lawyer presented their evidence methodically, the verified claims, the church records, the testimony of government inspectors. Then Eleanor was called to testify. She moved slowly to the witness chair, her frailty evident but her voice clear. "I was 15 years old in 1858, she said. "I remember my grandfather Jonas returning from his prospecting trip. He was excited about the silver deposits he'd found, showed us samples. My father Samuel helped him file the claims properly. I was there when they celebrated. The Grayson family wasn't even in Arizona, then they were still in Texas running cattle illegally across the Mexican border." "How could you possibly remember such details?" Harold challenged. Eleanor smiled slightly. "Because that was the summer I met Marcus. The summer that changed everything. Every detail of those months is burned into my memory." Harold tried to shake her testimony, but Eleanor held firm. Then Clara noticed something, a watermark on one of the supposedly old documents. She whispered urgently to their lawyer, who examined it closely. "Your Honor," he said suddenly, "we request a recess to examine these documents more closely." "Objection," Harold said. "They've had weeks to examine them." "Not these specific papers, Your Honor. They were only produced today." The judge granted a 2-hour recess. During that time, Clara and the lawyer rushed to the Phoenix newspaper office, where they confirmed her suspicion the watermark on the paper was from a company that hadn't existed until 1880. When court reconvened, the revelation caused an uproar. The documents were forgeries probably created by Grayson before his death and hidden to be discovered later. Harold's face went from red to purple. "I had no knowledge of any forgery. I was merely representing my client's interests based on documents provided to me." "Documents you failed to properly verify," the judge said sternly. "Mr. Pemberton, this court finds no merit in your case. The McAllister claims stand as verified. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the criminal courts for investigation of fraud." As they left the courthouse victorious, Harold intercepted them on the steps. "This isn't over," he hissed at Clara. "You humiliated me once by refusing my proposal. Now you've done it again." "You humiliated yourself," Clara replied calmly. "Both times. You could have had everything as my wife. Position, wealth, comfort. I have everything as Jonah's wife. Love, respect, partnership. Things you could never offer because you don't understand them." Harold's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." Jonah stepped between them. "You'll do nothing. If you come near my wife or my family again, I'll kill you. That's not a threat, Pemberton. It's a promise." Something in Jonah's eyes must have convinced Harold because he backed away, then turned and hurried down the courthouse steps. "It's really over," Eleanor said, leaning heavily on Clara's arm. "The Grayson threat, all of it." But Clara noticed she was unusually pale, her breathing more labored than normal. "We need to get you back to the hotel." Eleanor collapsed before they reached the carriage. The doctor they summoned was grave. "The consumption is advancing rapidly. The stress of travel and testimony has accelerated it. She needs complete rest, and even then—" "How long?" Jonah asked, his voice hollow. "Weeks. Perhaps a month or two, if she's very careful." They returned to the ranch, immediately converting the parlor into a sick room so Eleanor wouldn't have to climb stairs. Clara spent hours with her talking about everything and nothing, trying to fill 10 years of absence with a few weeks of presence. "I want to tell you something," Eleanor said one evening as Clara helped her sip some broth, "about why I really came back." "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. I came back because I heard about you. A woman in San Francisco mentioned meeting a rancher's wife from Arizona, a woman who'd married a stranger and made it work through sheer determination. She didn't know your names, but she described Jonah well enough that I knew. And I thought if my brother could open his heart enough to marry, if someone could love him enough to stay despite his wounds, then maybe there was hope for forgiveness." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "He forgave you the moment he saw you alive." "I know. That's who he is under all that stern exterior. The boy who used to catch fireflies with me, who taught me to ride, who fought anyone who made me cry." Eleanor gripped Clara's hand weakly. "Promise me something." "Anything. Don't let him close off again when I'm gone. He'll want to. It's his way of dealing with pain. Don't let him." "I promise." Eleanor smiled. "You're the sister I never had, Clara. I'm so glad he found you. Or you found him. However it worked." 2 weeks later, on a clear morning with the desert blooming after unexpected rain, Eleanor passed quietly. Jonah was holding one hand, Clara the other, while Samuel gurgled in his cradle nearby, the continuity of life asserting itself even in death's presence. They buried her next to Jonah's parents in the small cemetery on the ranch property. The entire population of Copper Creek came to pay respects along with several Chinese merchants from San Francisco whom Eleanor had helped over the years. "She lived more in her 30 years than most people do in 70, the Reverend said, and she died surrounded by love, forgiven, and at peace." That night, as Clara had expected, Jonah withdrew into himself. He sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars, rebuffing her attempts at comfort. Remembering her promise to Eleanor, Clara didn't give up. She brought Samuel out, placing the baby in Jonah's arms. "Your son needs his father," she said simply. "And your wife needs her husband. Eleanor wouldn't want this, Jonah. She came back to bring healing, not more pain." Jonah looked down at Samuel, who was reaching for his father's face with chubby hands. "She was so young." "She was, but she lived to see you happy. She got to meet her nephew. She died knowing she was loved and forgiven. That's more than many get. I wasted so much time being angry." "No, you took exactly the time you needed. And when she came back, you opened your heart despite the pain. That's courage, Jonah. The kind of courage that made me fall in love with you." He pulled her down beside him, Samuel between them. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't. I just know you. The real you, not the armor you wear." They sat together in the darkness, their son falling asleep to the rhythm of their heartbeats. The ranch spread out before them, the land that had brought them together, that had tested them, that had made them a family. "Clara," Jonah said suddenly, "I want to do something with the silver. Not extract it all, but enough to build something in Eleanor's memory. A school maybe, or a hospital, something that helps people. She would love that. And I want to go to Kansas City, see your aunt's boarding house. Make peace with that part of your past the way you helped me make peace with mine. Clara smiled in the darkness. When Samuel's older, when he can travel safely, we'll make it an adventure. Our first family adventure. The first of many, Jonah corrected, because I plan on having more children with you, Clara McAllister, brothers and sisters for Samuel. This house should ring with laughter. That's quite a change from the silent rancher who proposed to a stranger at sunset. That man didn't know what he was missing. This one does. As if in response to their conversation, a meteor streaked across the sky, brilliant and brief. Make a wish, Claire said. I don't need to. I have everything I could wish for. Then wish for something more. There's always room for more happiness. Jonah considered, then smiled. I wish for time. Decades of time with you, watching our children grow, building this ranch into something magnificent. That's a good wish. What about you? What do you wish for? Clara thought about the desperate woman who'd stood at this door with 47 cents and no options. That woman could never have imagined this moment, this life, this love. I wish that every woman who feels trapped could find her own sunset bargain, her own chance at freedom and love. That's a lot of sunset proposals. The world could use more of them. Samuel stirred in his sleep, making soft baby sounds. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, but it was a lonely sound, not a threatening one. The ranch was at peace, hard-won, but real. We should go in, Clara said. Samuel needs his crib, and you need sleep. Tomorrow, we start planning Eleanor's memorial. In a moment, Jonah said, his arm tightening around her. Let's just sit here a little longer, together. So they sat, the unlikely couple brought together by desperation and determination, now bound by love and loss and hope. The stars wheeled overhead, the desert breathed its ancient rhythm, and the Ironwood Ranch stood strong around them, a testament to the power of taking chances on strangers who might become everything. 5 years passed like chapters in a book, each season bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's quick wit and his father's steady nature. He was followed by twin daughters Rose and Rebecca, who arrived on a spring morning with considerably less drama than their brother. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now overflowed with children's voices. Clara stood on the porch one evening watching Jonah teach Samuel to rope a fence post. The boy's technique was clumsy, but enthusiastic, and his father's patience seemed infinite. The twins played nearby, making mud pies with deadly seriousness. You look content, a voice said behind her. She turned to find Mrs. Thompson, who'd come for her weekly visit. The older woman had become like a mother to Clara, filling a void she hadn't realized existed. I am content, Clara said. It still surprises me sometimes. Why should it? You've worked hard for this happiness. I suppose I keep waiting for the next crisis. Grayson, the government, Harold Pemberton. There's always been something to fight. Maybe that season is over. Maybe now you get to simply live. As if to challenge that optimism, Tom Watson came riding up fast, dust billowing behind him. Mrs. McAllister, we've got visitors coming. Fancy carriage, Eastern plates. Clara's heart sank. What now? The carriage that rolled up was indeed fancy, painted black with gold trim. The man who stepped out was elderly, well-dressed, with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. Mrs. Clara McAllister, he asked. Yes. My name is Charles Worthington. I'm a lawyer from Boston. I've been searching for you for quite some time. If this is about Harold Pemberton. Oh, no, nothing like that. Though I understand Mr. Pemberton is currently serving time for fraud. No, this is about your parents. Clara's breath caught. My parents have been dead for 15 years. Yes, I'm aware. But their estate has only recently been settled. There was a dispute over some property they owned in Massachusetts, tied up in legal complications. It's finally been resolved. I don't understand. My parents were teachers. They didn't own property. Mr. Worthington smiled. Your grandfather, on your mother's side, did. When he died, it passed to your mother, but she never knew. The paperwork was lost, then found, then disputed by distant relatives. It's taken all this time to sort out. And you as their only child inherit everything. It's not a fortune, but it's substantial. About $50,000 plus a house in Boston. Clara had to sit down. Jonah, who'd come from the corral at the sight of the fancy carriage, stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. $50,000, she repeated faintly. Plus the house, Mr. Worthington added helpfully. It's being rented currently, providing a nice income. Clara started laughing slightly hysterically. I came here with 47 cents, I beg your pardon. Nothing, just life's ironies. She looked up at Jonah. What do we do with $50,000? Whatever you want, it's yours. No, it's ours. Everything is ours. Mr. Worthington cleared his throat. There is one complication. You'll need to come to Boston to sign the final papers, in person. Clara and Jonah exchanged glances. They'd talked about traveling, showing the children the world beyond the desert, but there'd never been the right time or enough money to do it safely. We'll come, Jonah decided. All of us. It's time the children saw where their mother came from. I didn't come from Boston, Clara protested. No, but your family did. Your history. They should know it. The trip to Boston took 3 weeks by train, a marvel of modern convenience that delighted the children and exhausted their parents. Samuel peppered every conductor with questions about the engine, while the twins charmed their way into extra desserts in the dining car. Boston was overwhelming after years in the desert, the crowds, the buildings reaching toward the sky, the constant noise and motion. But there was beauty, too, in the public gardens, the grand architecture, the sense of history in every cobblestone. The house Clara inherited was modest but lovely, on a tree-lined street in a respectable neighborhood. Standing in the parlor where her mother might have played as a child, Clara felt the past and present collapse together. We could live here part of the year, Jonah suggested. Like we talked about with your aunt's boarding house. Give the children education options. Leave the ranch. Not leave, expand. Bill can manage things when we're gone. Tom's proven himself capable. We don't have to choose one life or the other. It was a radical idea for ranchers, but then their entire marriage had been built on radical ideas. While in Boston, they received word that changed everything once again. The government had decided to run a railroad spur through Copper Creek, specifically to access the mineral wealth of the region. The value of their land, already considerable, would triple. We'll be rich, Clara said, stunned. We already are, Jonah pointed out. This just makes it official. What do we do with that kind of wealth? Remember what Eleanor said about helping people? We could do that. Build that school she wanted, maybe a clinic. Create scholarships for children who want education but can't afford it. Clara thought about the desperate woman she'd been taking any chance for survival. We could help women. Women who need to escape bad situations but don't have 47 cents for a stagecoach ticket. The Clara McAllister Foundation. The Sunset Foundation, she corrected. For people who need a second chance as the day ends. They stayed in Boston long enough to settle the estate and establish the foundation's legal framework. Harold Pemberton's name appeared in the newspaper, sentenced to 5 years for fraud and attempted bribery. Clara felt only pity for him, a man so consumed by greed and spite that he'd destroyed himself. The journey home was different. They were no longer the desperate woman and the bitter rancher who'd made a sunset bargain. They were the McAllisters of Ironwood Ranch, respected, successful, and most importantly, happy. As their train pulled into Copper Creek Station, Clara saw the familiar landscape with new eyes. The desert that had once seemed alien now meant home. The isolated ranch that had felt like a prison now promised freedom. Bill Watson met them at the station, grinning broadly. Welcome home, folks. You'll be pleased to know everything's still standing. Any problems? Jonah asked. Nothing we couldn't handle. Though you should know there's been surveyors around. That railroad spur is really happening. They're offering good money for right-of-way access. We'll deal with it tomorrow, Jonah decided. Tonight we just want to be home. The ranch looked exactly the same, yet completely different. Clara realized it wasn't the place that had changed, but her perception of it. This was no longer where she'd fled to escape. It was where she'd chosen to build a life. That night after the children were asleep, Clara and Jonah sat on their porch as they had so many times before. But now the silence between them was full, not empty, weighted with shared history. Mutual understanding, love that had been tested and proven true. Do you ever think about how it all started? Clara asked. That day you opened the door and proposed marriage? Every day. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd said no? You couldn't have said no. It was destiny. Clara laughed. The practical rancher believes in destiny now. The practical rancher believes in you. Everything else follows from that. Even when I was a stranger. You were never really a stranger, Clara. From the moment you demanded to read that contract, you were exactly who I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. That's very romantic. You're still a bad influence. Still good. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. The same stars that had witnessed their awkward beginning, their dangerous middle, and now their peaceful present. Jonah, Clara said suddenly, let's renew our vows. What? On our anniversary, the real ceremony this time, not a sunset bargain with a contract. Our children should see their parents choose each other freely, with full hearts. You want to marry me again? I want to marry you properly. In the church, with the whole town watching with words of love instead of desperation. Jonah pulled her close. Yes, though I should warn you I might actually cry this time. I'm counting on it. The renewal ceremony took place on a perfect October day, exactly 7 years after their first hasty wedding. The church in Copper Creek was packed, everyone wanting to witness the transformation of a business arrangement into a love story. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, finally retrieved from storage and carefully restored. Jonah stood at the altar in a new suit, looking nervous, despite having been married to her for 7 years. Samuel served as ring bearer, solemnly carrying the cushion while trying not to trip. The twins threw flower petals with enthusiasm, if not accuracy, hitting several guests in the face. When Judge Thompson asked if they wanted to say their own vows, they both said yes. Jonah went first, his voice strong despite the emotion. Clara, 7 years ago I offered you a bargain marriage for survival, partnership, for necessity. I thought I was saving you. I didn't realize you were saving me. You brought light to my darkness, hope to my despair, love to my loneliness. You've given me children, laughter, and a reason to wake up each morning beyond mere duty. I choose you now not from desperation, but from devotion, not from need, but from want, not as a stranger, but as my beloved, my partner, my wife. Clara was crying before he finished, not caring who saw. When it was her turn, she had to take a breath before speaking. Jonah, 7 years ago, I accepted your proposal because I had no choice. Today, I accept it because I can't imagine any other choice. You've shown me that strength can be gentle, that protection can be freedom, that a business arrangement can become the deepest love. You gave me a home when I was homeless, a future when I was hopeless, a family when I was alone. I choose you now, with my whole heart, knowing exactly who you are, stubborn, protective, wonderful you, and loving every part. When Judge Thompson pronounced them husband and wife again, the kiss was neither brief nor businesslike. The congregation erupted in cheers, and Clara heard Mrs. Thompson say loudly, "About time they did it properly." The reception was held at the ranch tables set up under the stars. The whole town came along with friends from neighboring ranches, business associates from Phoenix and Tucson, even some of the Chinese merchants Eleanor had worked with. As the evening wound down, Clara found herself standing where she'd stood that first night, looking at the house that had seemed so austere and unwelcoming. Now it blazed with light and rang with music. Children ran through the yard, couples danced on the porch, and love seemed to shimmer in the very air. "No regrets?" Jonah asked, coming up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Not one," she affirmed, leaning back against him. "Well, maybe one." "What?" "I regret not bringing more than 47 cents. Imagine the interest I could have earned by now." He laughed, spinning her around to face him. "Clara McAllister, you are impossible. And you love me for it." "I do. God help me, I do." As they danced under the stars, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. The desperate flight from Kansas City, the shocking proposal, the violence with Grayson, the discovery of Silver Eleanor's return, and loss, the unexpected inheritance, the foundation they were building. Each challenge had strengthened them. Each joy had deepened their bond. "What are you thinking?" Jonah asked. "About our story. How it should be impossible, but here we are." "Here we are," he agreed. "The rancher and the runaway. The stranger and the recluse. The desperate woman and the bitter man." "No," Clara corrected. "Just Jonah and Clara. Just us." The music continued, other couples joining them in the dance. Their children ran past Samuel chasing the twins with a frog he'd caught. The ranch hands played fiddle and guitar, their music mixing with laughter and conversation. This was what Clara had been searching for without knowing it, not just survival, not just security, but this. Family, community, love, home. As the evening ended and guests began departing, Judge Thompson approached them. "You know," he said, slightly drunk on Bill Watson's homemade whiskey, "I've performed hundreds of marriages, but yours is the only one that started with a business contract and ended with this." He gestured at the celebration around them. "We're nothing if not unconventional," Clara said. "Unconventional. You're a miracle. Two broken people who put each other back together. If that's not proof of divine providence, I don't know what is." After everyone left and the children were finally asleep, Clara and Jonah stood once more on their porch, looking out at their land. The Ironwood Ranch stretched before them, no longer just a piece of property, but a living testament to their journey. "So what now?" Clara asked. "We fought the battles, secured the land, raised the children, renewed our vows. What comes next?" "Life," Jonah said simply. "Beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life. We wake up tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, choosing each other again and again." That sounds perfect. Even without the drama, the danger. Especially without those things. I've had enough adventure for one lifetime. But even as she said it, Clara knew it wasn't entirely true. There would be other challenges, children to raise the ranch, to run the foundation to build. The railroad would bring changes. The children would grow and make their own choices. Life would continue to surprise them, but they would face it all together. The desperate woman and the bitter man who'd found salvation in each other, who'd turned a sunset bargain into a sunrise promise, who'd proved that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Or perhaps Clara thought as Jonah led her inside their home, it wasn't an ending at all. Perhaps it was still the beginning, the sunset bargain transformed into an eternal dawn, always starting fresh, always full of possibility. The lamplight faded from the windows one by one as the family settled for the night. Outside, the desert continued its ancient rhythm, indifferent to human drama, but somehow blessed by it. A coyote called in the distance, no longer a sound of threat, but simply part of the landscape of home. And in the master bedroom of the ranch house, two people who'd started as strangers lay entwined, whispering plans for tomorrow, for next year, for the decades they'd wished for under shooting stars. The bargain made in desperation had become a choice made in love, renewed with every sunrise, sealed with every sunset, eternal as the desert itself.